Okay, here we go. Man, the season's almost over, but we're still moving forward. The deeper dive presented by fantasydraft.com. Dave Lochran, Ben Rasa, and the man, Alex Baker, Awesomeo himself. 4 games to touch on. NFL divisional round weekend. Boys, Ben, start with you. How we feeling today?
I'm all right.
That's good.
Win some, you lose some. College basketball, a little football before the football, but this is my favorite NFL week of the year. The 4 games, everyone is in play, no buys, just fantastic.
Like better than last week with 4 games?
Yeah, I like when the teams that have won get a chance to take down one of the big seeds, the people coming off the rest, they get them at home. Yeah, I like that Green Bay gets a home game. I love to see a possible snow. All good things in my book.
Yeah, and 12-degree weather with massive winds and monsoon-like rains today in Baltimore. Alex, how we feeling, man? And
So
go ahead.
people might have missed that. There was
Absurd.
some tweet from one of the prominent NFL writers about the weather in Baltimore. Apparently, he thought it was gonna be really rainy, but it was like a weather report from 2 weeks ago or something. So,
From Baltimore, Antarctica.
oh, is that what it was?
No, but that'd be great.
Might as well have been.
That's pretty good. Yeah, I'm feeling good, man. Like, it's exciting to have one last 4 game slate before we start really digging down into the smaller slates. And last week, I mean, I know that there was a lot of controversy about the results, but it showed, man, it's anyone's game. No discredit to Jade, but yeah, it's like every single week, anybody's guess is as good as anyone else's of what's going to happen. So I think it's still a really fun game, especially in some of these big tournaments where the risk reward is pretty high.
And whatever I do, I will convince you not to play DK Metcalf today. Alex, is there any good value to touch on? We don't have to get into it right now, but on these 4-game slates, it's generally hard to come by. Just taking an overall view of the slate before we dive in game by game, is there anything that stands out as legitimate value on a divisional round week?
Yeah, I mean, if you look at our ownership projections behind the paywall, there's one guy that this is on every site the most popular of the week, Damian Williams. And man, it's some suspect chalk to some extent, so I look forward to kind of seeing your guys' opinions on it.
Yeah, Ben, same question to you, and then we'll dive into these games.
Yeah, I mean, with 4 games, it's a different animal, and I don't see any glaring values in terms of guys that are going to be massive chalk down low. But at the same time, the domino effect of how you organize the games and what you want to do with some of these mid-range really determine it. I like how the slate sets up in the sense we have a pack of those top end running backs. You've got the receivers. I think you could almost make a case for 6-7 quarterbacks today, and I think that opens up a ton of different avenues.
Let's dive into it then, fellas. And by the way, happy to have everyone with us. Only a couple more NFL shows, so we'll look to close this out strong. Appreciate you guys supporting us throughout the entire season and hanging out now through 19 weeks of NFL action. Ben, San Francisco, Minnesota with a shot. Well, I'll speak for myself. I was shocked by that. Like I really liked the Saints last week. It did not help me from a betting or DFS perspective at all. Look, I don't want to shit on the Vikings, but like I really did not expect that to happen in the dome with Drew Brees at the helm. It was a surprise to me. And now here you have San Francisco at home coming off the bye, 7-point favorites, 44.5 total. They have a 25.8 implied total. It's the 3rd highest on the slate. Meanwhile, the other side, you've got the Vikings not getting their dues after last week, 18.8 implied total. That's the lowest on the slate, below even the Titans. So where were you last week, and how are you applying it, if anything, to this week where they go into San Francisco?
So I certainly, I discussed on the betting show, I didn't think the point should have been that high, but I also thought there was basically no chance they won the game.
Did it close at 7.5?
Yeah, it closed north of a touchdown, which I trust Cousins a little more than most people. I thought Dalvin Cook coming off a 2-week break was really important. And ultimately that's really what they leaned on. Now to win the game, that's a whole different animal. That was very impressive. This is a tough spot. So when I looked at these games, I thought that the Vikings, as impressive as they were, would be set up pretty well. But man, do I weigh heavily that the Niners had that bye week and are getting multiple starters, especially on defense back. You talk about Quan Alexander, D Ford, some guys in the secondary. That makes a huge difference. We saw against Atlanta late in the year. I thought it culminated with them losing that game of how banged up they were. But if this defense resembles what we saw early in the year, I think it's going to be a very tough sledding for the Vikings. Dalvin Cook's still certainly in my player pool, but man, I don't love the spot for them as a whole.
Vikings -7 right now.
Plus.
I'm sorry. I meant the Niners -7. You laying the points?
I am. Yeah, this is a spot that I think they get it going. If they can force Dalvin Cook to be more of just, he can work in the screen game, no doubt. But if they can start teeing off with Bosa and the gang, I think it could get away from the Vikings here.
All right, Alex, over to you here again. The Vikings touchdown dogs here on the road. Ben mentioned it. The Niners coming off of a bye week. I think we all expect this game to go a certain way, but how are we playing it from a fantasy standpoint, starting with the Niners?
I'm going to just jump right to this highest owned player in the Niners, Deebo Samuel. To me, that's just insane. Like the kind of ownership we're projecting him to have, like one of the most popular players on the slate. I just don't see that at all because, George Kittle is the obvious number one guy in San Francisco. They throw the ball at a very low rate on the 49ers, and then Emmanuel Sanders is pretty much equal to Deebo in the rotation here. So I think that's pretty suspect. I think one of the bigger edges I see is maybe just not having Deebo Samuel in your lineup, but I haven't completely built the lineups yet, so I'm not totally sure. How do you guys feel about Deebo this week?
Throw it over to Ben. I personally thought that the ownership was shockingly high, but a lot of it, to me at least, Ben, comes back to what type of value are we getting, and are people looking at 5,200 on DraftKings or over on FanDuel? Deebo coming in at 66. Are they looking at that as one of the better values because we don't have a ton?
I think so. It's a product of that. He's been fantastic this year. They use him in a lot of different ways. He gets a carry here and there. He's really an integral part of the offense. Emmanuel Sanders is the obvious pivot within the same game, not just
and almost the same price.
At almost the same price and just a sliver of the ownership. Now, I'm like everyone else. In a vacuum, I like Deebo Samuel more. But, when you're talking about massive ownership like that, it is a product, though, of a slate that's devoid of major value.
Yeah, right now, Deebo Samuel coming in as the highest owned wide receiver on DraftKings. So that says a lot. Let me stay with you for a minute, Alex. Outside of Deebo, you mentioned Kittle, is the top pass target on this team. They're obviously a run first squad, and I would imagine they'll look to assert themselves on the ground early on. What are we doing with someone like Raheem Mostert, who has been very productive with the opportunities he's had this season? He's getting quite a bit of ownership as well, albeit on a 4-game slate. Is there any interest in maybe punting with Coleman or a Breida, hoping that something goes well and you get them at virtually no ownership? What are we doing there outside of guys like Deebo Samuel?
Yeah, I'm a little disappointed you didn't mention Kyle Juszczyk. He's my value guy on the 49ers.
Okay, should have.
Not really. I'm just joking around. But Mostert, clearly the number one guy in San Francisco these days, but it's hard to feel real confident with this price tag, given they are probably going to have a 3-man rotation here. But there are very few running backs at the price level of Tevin Coleman. Basically the minimum on each site, only 7K on fantasy draft. That is going to be one of the players you can feel confident in that price range. So I think he makes a lot of sense from a roster construction standpoint.
Ben, how about you?
Oh boy. I don't know what to really make of the rest of this, to be honest. It's a situation when you talk about Deebo, we know that ownership is going to be there. Emmanuel Sanders, as I mentioned, I do have some Jimmy G. I will say that. And then you look at Kittle on the outside, but it's a team that, I have some 49ers defense. I'll say that much. So I think it's a game that they really could take over from that standpoint. And it's not an explosion game by any stretch. And of the four, although I do like some solid plays here with high floors, I don't see this being a back and forth shootout type.
Okay. So San Francisco 49ers, seemingly not one of your preferred overall offenses to target?
Not really. I mean, the backfield is such a mess. I think Mostert is so overvalued based on, I mean, he's scoring every game. I get it. But even when he scores one touchdown, that's not going to get you there at this price. He's going to have to contribute a little more than that. And with three guys, I don't know how you really decipher that. I do have some Jimmy G, so I loaded up with two of the pass catchers, and I would run it back with a guy like Dalvin or Diggs, someone like that. But overall, nothing too crazy from this one.
What about on the other side with the Vikings? You just mentioned a couple of guys that you might be running it back with, but digging into this Minnesota team a little bit, Adam Thielen with really his first quality game since week 5. Granted, he was out with injuries in many of them, but his first 100-yard game since week 5, his second of the season. He had that early fumble, but definitely bounced back from it and ended up putting really solid numbers on the board. But you're talking about somebody that is dealing with an ankle injury. His ankle reportedly required stitches after being stepped on by a cleat in Wednesday's practice. It seems like, I mean, there's been word that he's going to play, but I still not necessarily sure what we're getting here. What are you doing with the pass catchers here and Adam Thielen specifically?
Yeah, it's a weird situation. I mean, your guess is as good as mine how that will affect him. I mean, he's going to play, but will he be less than 100%? Will he have to come out for some reason? I certainly don't know. Diggs is someone that I will roll to. He was really not involved against New Orleans. They didn't need him. And then I think the clear guy and where I am allocating, I know he's expensive. Dalvin Cook, to me, regardless of game script, has to be involved. If they're winning, it's going to be because of him. If they're losing, they're going to have to get him involved in the screen game. Targets will go up, full PPR site. I still think he's effective regardless of the tough matchup.
Would you consider him one of your top options at the position this week?
He is. Him and Aaron Jones, who we'll, of course, get to. I mean, of course, they're expensive, but they are in great spots. So Dalvin Cook is on a ton of my lineups.
Okay. Yeah. Dalvin Cook's ownership coming in the 20s on DraftKings specifically. Alex, how are you targeting the Vikings today?
I think you gotta feel more optimistic about Cook than the pass catchers because 49ers pass defense has been pretty terrific on the year. And Cook, I think, is the guy that people using projections will gravitate towards over Derrick Henry, who doesn't get as many PPR points. So the big question here, though, is Minnesota going to be able to put up points? There's a good chance that they won't really be able to do that much. But I think Cook is just one of the best fantasy players in the game this season, so I feel pretty confident in just sliding him in.
All right, and what are your thoughts right now on the pass catchers? Whether it be Diggs, Thielen, like we said, dealing with that ankle injury, considered a game time decision, and I guess I'll throw into the mix because the position is going to be, basically just saturated with ownership of a couple tight ends. Namely Kelsey and Kittle with some Andrews mixed in. Is somebody like Kyle Rudolph on the map for you, assuming this team gets behind early? He had 7 targets against New Orleans and that game-winning touchdown in overtime.
Yeah, I think Kyle Rudolph is kind of the guy in everyone's mind. It's because of that, so I think the public might be pretty high on him. I feel pretty confident. It's because he hasn't been doing much on a per game basis this year to just leave him off my rosters. But the guy I'm looking at here that I'm most interested in is Diggs. He had the rough game last week compared to Thielen, so I'm hoping that people will click Thielen because he's cheaper. But Diggs is Thielen, he's more expensive on fantasy draft and DraftKings, but I have Diggs projected higher than him anyway, so much prefer Diggs, and he makes a good alternative to Debo.
Ben, any additional thoughts on Rudolph or anyone else that we haven't touched on before we move on to the next one?
So the Vikings are pretty concentrated. It's not a team where I look to reach. They're going to have to lean on Cook. I think they lean on Diggs on the outside. If you're rolling the dice with Cousins, I think Thielen is certainly part of that. You got to take some stands there. I'm not going to go to Rudolph coming off the big game. I'm not going to go to Irv Smith. I tried that last week. Big mistake. So for me, it's just, one of the Vikings. I don't have a ton of Cousins, if at all, at this point, honestly. Not going to head too crazy against this Niners defense.
All right. Today's show is sponsored by fantasydraft.com, by the way, the only rake-free daily fantasy sports site in the industry. Over time, a DFS player can lose up to 30% of their bankroll due to rake, but Fantasy Draft has gone ahead and fixed that problem. Because only on Fantasy Draft are 100% of the entry fees paid out to the winners 100% of the time. Means more money in your pocket. If you sign up at fantasydraft.com with referral code AWESEMO, AWESEMO, you'll get a 7-day free trial membership. 7-day free trial membership. Sign up with the code AWESEMO and get those free 7 days over there at fantasydraft.com, the only rake-free daily fantasy sports site in the industry and the sponsor of the NFL Deeper Dive. All right, let's keep it moving here. Alex, I'll throw it over to you. Baltimore and Tennessee. I for one was pretty excited to see Tennessee go out and beat up on the Patriots, get that little pick six to make it look like it wasn't as close as it was. But you've got a Baltimore team that's just been, dare I say, unstoppable this season. 10-point favorites, 48 point over under. They have a 29-point implied total. Right now, that's the second highest behind only Kansas City, and 19 for Tennessee is the second lowest, ahead of only the Vikings. It seemed Derrick Henry had 77% or 75% of Tennessee's offense last week. 200 plus yards rushing and receiving combined. It seems like it'll be difficult to get him going, but we'll get your opinion here. We'll start with Baltimore and break down what we've got in Lamar Jackson first. Then we can get to some of these pass catchers and touch on the running game where Mark Ingram has been questionable throughout the week.
Yeah, I agree on your assessment. Baltimore is unstoppable. They're averaging more than 5 yards per run. And when you're doing that, you just end up having a lot more plays because you just sustain drives. And I never like picking opponents to Baltimore for that reason because there are just fewer good drives in the game. Baltimore also plays at a slow pace. So I'm more interested in the Baltimore guys here. I think that Lamar always makes a good option for GPPs, and you can pair him with Mark Andrews. That'd be my favorite. And then you mentioned Mark Ingram. I've seen some concerns about his health. I'm not really that interested to begin with, but if you do kind of buy into this Ingram thing about him not being 100%, maybe you could look at Gus Edwards as a value play this week.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. I'll toss it over to Ben. Ben, I put in my notes for us to discuss Gus Edwards, even if we're not interested, but just because of the scenario playing out right now with Mark Ingram, is he going to play? But we'll see a split backfield, or split carries in the backfield, which really, I don't think it matters who's in there as long as Lamar Jackson is, right? I think all of them would be, I think you'd agree, all of them are going to be able to produce in that backfield, in that offense. But Gus Edwards, is he worth it at 2% ownership, taking some shots in tournaments, just trying to be totally different? Or is it just not even on your radar today?
If he was a little cheaper and Ingram was ruled in, I might do it just because I think with an injury like that, there's a chance that Ingram gets a carry or two and just goes out and never comes back.
Yeah.
But even if you got that part right, then you just have a $4,900 running back against the Titans on DraftKings. That's a fine spot, but it's no smash spot. And there's no guarantee you're going to reap benefits from that. So for me, it honestly just solidifies, not that we need to solidify Lamar, but he could take the extra production before a guy like Gus Edwards.
Okay. So Lamar Jackson is, by the way, Lamar Jackson is plus 150 on the DraftKings Sportsbook to score and for the team to win. Lamar Jackson seems to always score, but that's besides the point. If you're talking about Jackson in this one, he's very expensive. That's that's what you're going to get with him. I'll ask you where you at on him, and also 220 and a half. 220 yards, 220 and a half yards is the line on Lamar Jackson passing yards, and rushing yards at 77.5.
Not bad. The problem is it's just such a massive opportunity cost when you talk about him. I forced him in cash. He has an incredibly high floor because he runs the ball. They can get him the ball, obviously, because he's the quarterback, so he can run whenever he wants. The passing game, it depends how this game unfolds. Tennessee wants to slow it down. They want to lean on Henry. We'll see what the Ravens do. They're also somewhat methodical. So I wouldn't be really expecting a massive passing attack from him, but he's just so unique. You can run him out alone. You can run him with Hollywood Brown. You can run him with Andrews. It's just someone you need exposure to, in my opinion. I don't have any inkling in terms of what to really do, in the sense that the other quarterbacks determine if he's a good play. If he goes for 30 and Deshaun Watson goes for 27, you probably want those savings. There's an opportunity cost there, but this is a guy that no doubt, if you're building multiple lineups, you want exposure to. He's just that good.
Minus 137 on the over, 77 and a half rushing yards. You like that?
I like that more than the passing yards. I think that they can control that. If Ingram is limited, if the game is tight, the carries are going to be elevated. There's no doubt about it. Whereas there's a lot of other ways that the Ravens can control this game, and Lamar could have an efficient game, but really not do much through the air.
Quick question before I turn it back over to Alex. Is it possible, Ben, to stop Lamar Jackson on the ground, knowing that he's actually developed and has become far more polished as a passer? Like, is it doable for the Titans?
I don't think it's doable to stop him. I think it's, if you want to take that away, you could allocate it and you'll be at a severe disadvantage in the secondary. But if they want to get him, I'll put it like this, if he has 15 plus carries on the ground, I don't see any way he doesn't approach 100 yards again. It's just too hard with the way these runs are designed to really stop him in some major capacity.
Alex, what about the pass catchers? As of now, you're getting some ownership, and it makes sense because of some of the price points. But Marcus Brown, 22% ownership right now. He's $4,400 on DraftKings, and Mark Andrews, one of the higher owned tight ends. Look, it's a low passing volume offense, but at least we know where the ball goes when Lamar Jackson does pass it, and they're 9.5-point favorites. Do either of them stand out to you today?
Marquise Brown fits in the Deebo Samuel category for me, where, in isolation, I think he's fine. He makes a ton of sense because of the price point to fill out a roster. Just one of the cheaper wide receivers this week that you can count on to actually be out there most of the game. But it's hard to project Lamar to really throw the ball enough times to love any of the guys aside from Mark Andrews. I like Mark Andrews a lot because on the season, he's targeted at one of the highest rates when he's on the field, and they throw the ball of 31.8%. And I'm hoping is kind of a red flag, but he has the potential that he could get more snaps because he doesn't play every snap because it's playoffs and you're going to try to go to their preferred guys. So he'd be the guy I'm targeting in the passing game here.
Okay. And Ben, you talked about it a little bit, but who would you, if you had one player to pair with Lamar Jackson, who would your preferred option be?
So just the way this slate developed, it would be Marquise Brown, even though that scares me a bit. It's just the price point is so lucrative, and there are so many, we have Kelsey, we have Kittle. I can get there if I don't go to Andrews, but I do worry about a guy that is relying on limited targets and really his floor is not there, but I do find myself going to him because I need that exposure and that salary savings.
Yeah. The floor is non-existent.
It really is. It's scary.
It's kind of remarkable too that 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. He has 8 of his last 9 games with 4 or fewer targets. He is getting a lot of ownership, and I understand it because while his floor might not be there, his ceiling is. But I have to ask you, is the floor a little bit overstated, a little bit overblown? He's had one game this season with north of 25 fantasy points. That was in week 1. And then in week 12, he had that 2 touchdowns in the first quarter against the Rams. Aside from that, I mean, Marquise Brown has been a middling option at best. I totally understand all of this, but are we overstating his ceiling a little bit, or on a 4-game divisional round playoff slate, is it just the best we have to work with?
I think it's the latter for me. Truth be told, there's probably some bias because I've seen him in college break slate after slate. I know it's a different animal, but this is a guy, he has home run ability. And now this offense, a lot of those weeks, I will say, when you're up by 45 points in the third quarter, you don't need to give him targets. If this game is close, this is the playoffs. I do think those things work in his favor, not just in a ceiling, but in a floor. They should get him some additional targets today. In the game, could they roll Tennessee? Of course they could, but it's just a little different than when you're playing teams like the Jets every week.
Okay. Alex, let's turn the page to Tennessee. DraftKings has Derrick Henry's rushing prop at 94.5 yards. 94.5 yards. I'm worried about Derrick Henry here. I'll be completely honest with you. I am a huge Derrick Henry fan. One of the most enjoyable running backs to watch, and he doesn't even really catch the ball. Although when he does, he seems to get 20 plus yards every time. But yeah, it's a really difficult spot. And if they go behind early, things could get ugly. It's also very possible that they do. So your take on Derrick Henry, and are we crazy enough to throw a little Dion Lewis exposure in there in the event that this game flips upside down early on?
So I think that people really tend to remember what happens in the last game at the most when they're evaluating these games here. And we saw Derrick Henry just be the player of the week in the wild card round. We know on the team level, this isn't a great spot for Tennessee because Baltimore's offense is so good. They just dominate the time of possession. So that makes it tougher for opponents to get there. I'm happy enough leaving Derrick Henry off my lineups for the most part. If you're using an optimizer, you probably won't get Henry like pretty much at all because of the price. And that kind of makes him appealing in a sense because if all the sharps are off him, then you're taking a guy that if you make the rest of your lineup pretty strong, or pretty well, I guess I should say, with skill, you're exposed to a guy that other smart people like don't have, and that could be an advantage.
Okay. Ben, if I gave you 94.5 rushing yards at even money, which would you take?
Oh man, honestly, it should be a slam to the over, because if you're telling me this guy, if this game stays close, he's gonna have 35 carries again.
Oh, he has to.
He has to. They have no other choice. Corey Davis stepped up last week with a whopping 0. Like that was the big addition. AJ Brown was non-existent. This is what they have to deal with. The problem that I have is what happens if they're unable to punch first or stay in it. I think Dion Lewis would have to have a part of this game. And if Derrick Henry has like 24 carries today, which is a massive workload, you're in trouble. In DFS, you're in trouble in your props. So I also don't have much exposure. I took the savings with the other better running backs in my situation. And it's just hard to imagine that Tennessee is able to control the game. And he's so game script dependent. But I will say just real quick, not that anyone cares about this, I have not been a Derrick Henry fan, and this year he has been Lofty, you convinced me. What a joy to watch. Just an unbelievable.
Isn't it?
It really is. The way he.
I mean, hold on. He also won you like $240,000.
That is true.
But go ahead, because I think you're being genuine here.
No, I am. Before that even happened, just watching him in games where I have no money on the line, his ability to truly get stronger. Mortal Kombat, take the other person's soul and then stronger. It's unbelievable by the fourth quarter how he just is punishing other teams. I really do enjoy watching it.
And that sneaky, this odd and almost like don't believe your eyes breakaway speed.
Yeah, he runs like I call him the ostrich because I think he runs like an ostrich. When he gets in the open field, it doesn't look like his arms are moving, but he's just flying. He is a dangerous man.
Can we get rid of that hair out of the back though?
Well, that thing is out of control too. But
what's worse, that or Elfrid Payton's reverse mop?
That's a whole different show for a different.
That's a whole different show. Alex, can we do anything with the pass catchers or quarterback for Tennessee? I have virtually zero interest here. But you know what? You're the best at finding an edge, so we'll hear it from you.
I'm kind of on Corey Davis, I think. The thing is, I'm thinking of this meme where, you know how they list all the players as like Derrick Henry is amazing, Ryan Tannehill is underappreciated, Corey Davis, AJ Brown is fantastic. He's kind of like the left out guy here, and I think that compared to other options like Debo Samuel, Marquise Brown, there's not that much difference in volume. I mean, Debo is projected to do pretty much a few points better on average, but I'm expecting everyone to be off Corey Davis just because he did put up that goose egg, and he could be that low-owned cheap guy.
Okay, Ben, same question to you.
Boy, it makes me feel better to hear Alex say that because I am in the same boat. He's coming off a bagel. This game, what we saw last week was Tennessee to a T running what they want to do. If that happens again, Corey Davis is going to be ineffective. But what happens if Baltimore covers this number? I have to imagine, Derrick Henry is at a big disadvantage, and guys like Corey Davis are forced to make plays. I still worry about him, but when you're looking for value, I think you can look to him on this slate. AJ Brown, maybe. I don't have any Tannehill, but I did take some stabs with a cheap Corey Davis in certain spots.
Okay. Pro Football Focus has him with the second worst wide receiver versus cornerback grade against, should see, presumably a lot of Marcus Peters, although he has a better grade than Olabisi Johnson. So that's good. Ben, my thing, like, I get it. There's Baltimore defense, man. Like, I wouldn't be surprised if Tennessee scored 6 points today.
I mean, I get it. Even if that's the case,
he should still get work.
They have, like if Corey Davis gets 6-7 targets today, I've done my job.
Oh, no. Yeah. 100%. And you're right. Look, if the game script went the same as last week, I would be, and I was shocked by Saints and Vikings, but I would be shocked if it took the same direction as last week or even close.
Me too. Tennessee may do some things to hang in, but I think that it's going to be hard pressed for them to get by without having any factor in the passing game.
All right, let's say, and I asked Alex this already, but Ben, let's say that this Titans team is down 17 points after one. Does Dion Lewis get enough involvement in the offense, or are we essentially just going to see Mike Vrabel be stubborn and say, you know what, my best player is Henry, I have to keep running him?
So I think if it's early, if they get punched immediately, it's not like Derrick Henry's going to be phased out of the game.
Of course not.
But Dion Lewis, I think, will get some work. And as it goes on, and they really start to tilt the balance, I can't imagine he doesn't get easy targets and quite a amount of them. I have some exposure similar to Corey Davis. They're similar prices, of course, different positions. A guy like that could be a factor in this game with the ability for this to get out of hand.
Okay. Fair enough. God, Marquise Brown, the over's at -148, but his receptions prop is 2.5.
Yeah, that's dangerously concerning. I'm not gonna lie.
All right. Alex, Kansas City, dangerously concerning. Kansas City and Houston. We've got the Chiefs with the highest implied total on the slate, 30.8 here against the Texans that had to claw their way back from a 3-score was it 16-0 or was it 18-0? I don't know. Either way, a significant deficit last week at home. They ended up pulling that one out, but it did not come easy against the Bills. They're now 10-point dogs at Arrowhead Stadium, 51.5-point over under, easily the highest on the slate. Very interested to get your take on Damian Williams and the rest of this offense.
Yeah, I mean, everyone knows this is the best spot of the week because you got probably the second best quarterback in the league. I mean, maybe 1B, Lamar Jackson, against a team that has a weaker than average defense and offense that isn't too exciting. So I think that, I mean, you got to love the Chiefs here. But the thing is, like, the ownership on every player on this team is so high that it may be hard to find a big advantage going to these guys. So I'm a little bit torn because they are so exceptional. Pretty much everyone. Damian Williams is kind of that mid-range guy. Tyreek Hill as probably one of the tied with Devontae Adams and Hopkins for the best wide receiver. Travis Kelce, uh, Harrison Butker. No, just kidding.
Down season.
Uh, yeah. So I think they're clearly the quote unquote best plays of the slate, but everyone kind of is playing it that way.
Okay. Ben, Damian Williams, ownership right now. I'll be honest. It makes sense because once again, I've repeated myself many times, just with the same theme. It's a 4-game slate and they have a 31 point total. He's 44.3% ownership right now on DraftKings. It's the highest on the slate, also the highest on FanDuel at 50.5. And in fantasy draft, the same can be said at 48%. You can check out our ownership projections, by the way, player projections, our top stack tool, all of our premium articles, the lineup builder, Fantasy Cruncher add-on by using the sign-up code 2020. Actually, it's the last day of this promo. I think it's the best one we've done, at least since I've been with Awesemo. It's 20 days of Awesemo Plus Platinum subscription, all access for $20, $1 a day if you just use the sign-up code 2020. 2020. Get everything included. Fantasy Cruncher is the add-on, but everything else is there. All of these tools developed and used every day by Alex Baker, by Awesemo himself, or the last day to use the sign-up code New Year, one word, to get 20% off an Awesemo Plus all year annual pass. That's 20% off a $200 value. So 2020 is the code to get $20 or 20 days for $20. New Year will get you 20% off an annual pass. That's a $200 discount, 20% off. So 2020 or New Year, use it at checkout, and we'll see you over there. Say what's up in the premium Slack chat when you do. Back to this one, though, Ben. What are we doing with Damian Williams, who is very, very popular across the industry?
He really is. I seriously considered taking 0%.
Wow.
And
okay.
Making a full-on stand. I did not do that. I have some exposure. I am way underweight. And listen, it's a situation that I'm banking on a couple different things. I'll talk about this more when we get to the Texans, but I'll say this for the Chiefs side. Alex talked about it. They've got weapons all over the place. There's a lot of ways that the Chiefs score a lot of points, and Damian Williams is not involved in the touchdowns, and he has a fine game, but not at that type of ownership. So, we know about Mahomes. We know about Tyreek. We know about Kelce. He's got a Q tag. I don't worry about that at all. Then you have the secondary options. The receivers are very difficult to decipher when you talk about Sammy Watkins, Hardman, Robinson. I don't really have a ton of them. And Damian Williams is kind of in that mid-range on a slate that's really devoid of mid-range salaries. So I get it, but I am trying to make a stand and find other ways to get Chiefs exposure.
Okay. How much do you worry about this backfield being like a legitimate 2 or 3-way carousel today? Because based on Damian Williams' ownership, you would think that he is the clear-cut 3-down workhorse back in Kansas City, right?
Well, I don't worry about it. I hope that's the case. Yeah.
No. I'm saying how much, because you don't have a lot of him right now. How much of that is the worry for you? You
yeah.
You know what I mean?
Absolutely. No, I think that's one of the reasons that I'm using to justify this is that Andy Reid is so creative. He has so many weapons, not just in the backfield, but on the team in general. I wouldn't be stunned to see Tyreek have a couple carries. I think LaShawn McCoy could get involved in some capacity, or Mahomes could just go nuts and they're throwing the ball over. It's not like he can't catch, but there's just a lot of ways that he has a middling game. And I haven't even talked about, and I have some pretty hot takes on the Texans side. So we'll say.
Okay. Well, before we get there, I want to ask Alex and about this here. I don't want to give away all of our information on ownership projections, but I'll just say this much, Alex. Along with Damian Williams, Travis Kelce, Tyreek Hill, and even Sammy Watkins, because of this total in the game, because they've expected to score 30-plus points, the implied total is plus 30. All of these guys are very popular. Do you see yourself being above the field on guys like Kelce and Hill and Sammy Watkins, who have been very quiet since week 1?
I like Watkins because we're seeing a pattern of a couple of guys getting all the ownership in that range. He's one of the cheaper wide receivers, and there aren't very many you can feel confident will actually play the most of the game. So I think that he makes a great alternative to Debo or Marquise Brown, basically the same price. So as far as getting over and under on the other players, they're all great plays. So I'm not really sure. I don't feel really passionately about either way. Because you do need to pick 9 guys. I'll probably have some Chiefs in each lineup, probably mix and match them. But I think Damian Williams is probably the most interesting situation because over 17 weeks, you'd expect to have some idea what a team would do, but we just really don't know. There's like all these questions around like, is LaShawn McCoy going to be back in the mix here? He hasn't played for a couple weeks, and then we got the possibility of maybe Darwin Thompson playing too. So it's hard to feel real confident about Damian Williams, but it's also hard to kind of build a lineup without him, I suppose, given the ownership.
Alex, over under 54.5 rushing yards for Damian Williams.
Yeah, I mean that's not that exciting, but so I have him for 24 receiving yards too, and that's equaling a projection of 16 PPR, 14 on half point PPR. I mean that's a pretty good projection. It's not elite, but yeah, there's definitely the possibility that he busts for sure.
Okay. All right, Ben. You talked a lot about Williams. I want your opinion on Hill and Kelsey and Watkins, and then we'll get your Houston hot takes, which I think there's one based on the NFL survey that you can find at awesomemode.com that I think there's one that we are very much in agreement on, but we'll get there in just a moment.
Yeah, so I mean, we know about Tyreek. I do think in a playoff game, not that they're not going to get him the ball in a normal game, but they're going to be even more creative, get the ball in his hands. He's a great player. Just weighing him against Devontae Adams and DeAndre Hopkins. Boom bust naturally with him. And then Travis Kelsey, premier tight end play along with Kittle. So these guys are fantastic. I don't mind them in any format. It's just about mixing and matching. This is going to be the most popular game. You have to make sure you get leverage. Or if you want to make a stand, you could try to fade the game in some capacity and hope that you can get by.
Okay, let's talk Houston. I'm really fascinated by the backfield here for a couple of reasons. One, we know this Kansas City run defense, terrible all year. It really didn't get much better. Football Outsiders has them ranking 29th in run defense DVOA. You look over at Pro Football Focus, things don't get much better. They're ranked 29th as well. But they also have allowed more receiving yards to running backs than any other team in the league this season, which makes it interesting. If you're someone like Duke Johnson, whether or not they want to involve him is another story. But Carlos Hyde to me is a very, very interesting play today. And to me, I actually think it's kind of wild that his ownership is so much lower than Damian Williams. But a lot of that is because when you're 10-point dogs, that's going to happen.
For sure. And we are in agreement there. Carlos Hyde, and I want to be clear, this is a regular season game, but he torched them the first time and they won in Arrowhead.
Yep. That was one of the biggest stands I took all season, was going very heavy on Carlos Hyde and fading the other like $4,500 backs that week.
And there is can Deshaun Watson and Duke Johnson and DeAndre Hopkins and Fells and whoever the tight end is, can they go back and forth with Mahomes in a shootout? Maybe. But I also think that there is a real scenario that Houston leans on Carlos Hyde and tries to mirror the game that we saw in week 6.
Yep, so slow it down.
If you slow the game down, there's a very interesting build where you play Carlos Hyde. You could play the Texans defense for the min. I'm not saying to do that. And you try to take a leverage stand against the game and hope that the Texans somehow control it. That's very aggressive. I certainly am doing it. I think that the Texans can win this game. I like them certainly with the 10 points. And although it's a very tough spot in Arrowhead, there are multiple ways that they can do it. And it's not to say I don't like Deshaun Watson and the pass catchers, just different types of builds within the same game. But the Hyde one is by far the most interesting to me.
We talked about it extensively around that time. Detroit almost beat them because they leaned heavily on the ground. And then Indy did beat them because they leaned heavily on the run game. And then Houston came in, did the same thing, and beat them in week 6. Alex, backfield for Houston. What are we doing here?
I think that yeah, it's interesting because if we're talking about fading Damian Williams and some other guys, then we're gonna have to go to some other less popular plays like Carlos Hyde and Duke Johnson. But I have to admit, they're just not cheap, and they're not the kind of workload players that really justify the salaries they have in the 9Ks on fantasy draft. So I'm not very enthusiastic about it, but I might sprinkle in a couple of shares.
Okay. What about Deshaun Watson here, Alex? In a game where you assume that he's going to have to throw quite a bit, his ownership, as of now, really not that high.
I really like Deshaun Watson. I think he's one of the 2 quarterback stacks that I'm pretty enthusiastic about being over the field. He adds value with his legs. He throws the ball a lot. So I think that equals a big fantasy performance, especially against the Chiefs, whose defense is not their strongest suit. And we just got gifted some news that Jordan Akins is out tomorrow. And that kind of opens up Darren Fells again as an interesting value option at tight end when everyone else is spending up. So I think that him, in addition to Fuller and Hopkins, make pretty interesting targets this week.
Are you interested in the passing game here, Ben? And if so, are you willing to put maybe some Duke Johnson into those lineups?
Oh, I got Duke Johnson. I have one of the Texans running back on almost every team. I'm playing 2 game scripts. I'm either taking a stand against the game with Carlos Hyde, or I have Deshaun Watson with Duke and one of the pass catchers.
I love the idea of that.
That's really my stand of the week, really. And I hope Damian Williams, just chills out on the sidelines. But that's neither here nor there. So I absolutely like Deshaun Watson as well. I mean, we know about Hopkins. Alex just talked about tight end now solidified. I think that the pure gamble is Will Fuller. I don't know if I can do it. There's so many ways he's a decoy. He's limited to an extent. He's a non-factor. But man, if he's good to go, if he's 75%, we know he could break any slate, and he's not going to be owned.
Listen, I know this is probably the spot. Well, this is the spot that will dictate how your week goes. Am I wrong to say that?
Oh, it's clear for me. If the Texans win the game or this goes way under the total, I would assume I will have a big advantage on the field.
Okay. Well, while we're doing it, I guess I've got to ask you, would you bet the Texans outright?
I already did that. So, so yes, I would. Plus 350, plus 10. I want to be clear. Mahomes and Arrowhead, this is a tough spot, but Deshaun Watson can do it. And I think they can control this game on the ground in a lot of scenarios. So I took that plunge.
So I'm assuming you love them over 20.75 points too.
I do lean over there, but I will say I think that all the games where this goes, say like 15 points under the total, lean to the Texans.
Is the Texans winning? Yeah,
absolutely.
Like a 21-17 game is probably how Houston wins this.
Yes. And I do want to say real quick, Chris Austin, great sub, a guy who watches a lot of our shows with the super chat. Most appreciated, my man.
Appreciate you, man. Definitely do. All of the super chats and contributions and support is greatly appreciated from everyone that's tuned in throughout the year. You guys want to move on, get this final game out of the way, and turn it over to Live Before Lock?
Oh, absolutely.
All right. Seattle on the road, Lambeau Field, facing the Green Bay Packers coming off their bye week. Alex, 45.5 over under. Packers, 24.8 implied, 20.8 for Seattle. Seattle, 4-point dogs on the road. Let's start with Green Bay. Aaron Rodgers has looked mortal, very much so this season. Must-win game against Detroit. It took him to come down to the wire to get this win over the look. Things happen. It's a divisional game, but still, It hasn't, and he threw 55 times. I'll just turn it over to you. Where are you at on Rodgers here, where he's like $2,000 less expensive than Lamar Jackson on DraftKings?
Yeah, I mean, you're kind of triggering me here because that game, man, that was when the season I was done with the Lions because it was the absolute worst. I guess you're talking about week 17, but the first matchup too.
Wasn't there some officiating at the end of that game that?
Yeah.
Ninja,
the video gamer, said he would never watch an NFL game again. Anyway.
He's got like 6 million followers.
I know, yeah.
You think he stood by it?
Well, I think being a Lions fan is pretty rough, and he learned that for the first time. So I think Rodgers has been disappointing this year. Only 7 yards a pass. That's well below average, and I mean that makes it pretty unexciting to roster him. Now this game should be a good competitive one, so I think it definitely could work. I'm more interested in the Seattle side where they've had a more efficient passing offense at about 80 yards per attempt. But I think there are some Packers I have some interest in here.
Okay. Well, you know what? Who are they?
Well, I think,
who are they?
Allen Lazard is probably my favorite guy just because he fits in that same price range as some of the chalk that I don't feel real confident about. And down the stretch, he was the guy that played the second most snaps at wide receiver. So I feel pretty good about him. He's been really good on the year when he's been on the field. And then if you really want to dig deep, I suppose you could take a shot on Geronimo Allison, who's kind of their wide receiver 3. I don't really recommend going that much into the sleeper territory, but he was on the field a lot week 17. And maybe if you're trying to get a unique lineup in the Millionaire Maker, you could consider him.
Okay. Ben, Allen Lazard has been targeted 17 times over the last 2 games. And it's fair to point out that Aaron Rodgers has also thrown like 95 times in those games too. So, in terms of actual market share targets, it's not that high, but there really aren't a ton of weapons in this passing game. So let's try to break this down outside of Davante Adams, who I want to talk about. And I'll get your take on Aaron Jones. You mentioned earlier that you like him a lot, and we'll dive into that. But, Davante Adams has been targeted 10 plus times in all but 1 game since week 4. I know he was out for a while there, but still, he's just there. There are very few targets that are very few receivers that are targeted as much every game by their quarterback as Davante Adams. But then it gets ugly after that, and Lazard seems to be the number 2 there for whatever that's worth. Your thoughts on Rodgers against the Seattle team that's shown some significant holes in their secondary this season, and pretty much got an easy way out with Josh McCown, who, did you see, played with a torn hammy that was off the bone last week?
Should have went to Greg Ward, man.
Anyway, go ahead.
It's neither here nor there. I think Rodgers is fine. The problem I have is just Deshaun Watson is right there. Russell Wilson is right there. And I think they just do a little more, especially on the ground. And this Packers team is different. They're very balanced. They can lean on the defense. They can do it in other ways. So Lazard, as Alex talked about, he's right next to Hollywood Brown. That gives him some appeal just on his own merit there. So I have exposure to him. He opens up some salary.
Okay. What do you make of the matchups here, defensive matchups for Davante Adams and Allen Lazard? Because I was looking at, and by the way, this is never Bible when you're taking a look at these cornerback or wide receiver cornerback matchups, but Davante Adams, it's showing the Trey Flowers, it's showing Allen Lazard against Shaq Griffin. Like, do you have any concerns there? Any questions about what this coverage is going to look like?
No, not really. I think they're fine matchups. They're not perfect. They're not awful. I think both of them can win. It really comes down to volume for Lazard. Davante Adams is going to get his. I don't worry about him at all. He is, to me, maybe the highest floor on the entire slate. I think 10 plus targets is almost a given, regardless of game script. And then in the backfield, Aaron Jones is certainly in play. I will say, the more I built, the more I got to Dalvin Cook over him. I still have a good amount of Aaron Jones, but Dalvin Cook did emerge as my top back of the day.
How much does ownership come into play there with, Jones being maybe 8% higher than Cook? I think he'll probably be even more than that if I had to guess.
So do I. That's part of it for sure. And it's not to say I don't like him, but what really happened to me was on teams where I had Devontae Adams. If I had Devontae Adams and Aaron Jones, then I'm in a weird spot. I'm not saying you need Rodgers per se, but you're allocating a ton of Packers salary. And so that naturally made my balance a little unbalanced. And I ended up going elsewhere on some of those type of builds.
For any of our premium subs, we did get an ownership update just recently, and Jones and Cook are actually closer together now, Alex, than they were before. Your thoughts on the Packers backfield?
So I hear Aaron Jones getting all of this hype, and that kind of scares me a little bit because I feel like he's been one of the luckier players this year as far as fantasy production. I mean, this game is shaping up to be pretty competitive, so I think that we should see a little bit more passing from Green Bay than we did over the season, and they already passed at a pretty high rate. So I'm more enthusiastic about the passing offense in Green Bay. Jones, I'm a little bit concerned because Jamal Williams is back. That threatens his workload to some extent. And I guess the price is extremely high for where I have him. So I don't think I'm going to end up with much Jones.
What about Jamal Williams? Anything there?
I'd be more interested if he was cheaper on FanDuel. He looks like a good value play at 5,100, but I'm actually I'm looking at the next game, or I mean the next team here for my contrary and cheapy.
All right, Ben. Anything else from the Packers?
No, not really. Jamal Williams is a backup to Aaron Jones. I'm not really getting there in any meaningful way. I see Chad talking about Jimmy Graham. There's so many things that line up, but he's just not on the field a ton. I think if you're running some Rodgers stacks, maybe you can YOLO it, but he's not a great play. And with Fells now maybe solidified, it makes it even harder.
Okay. Ben, Marshawn Lynch saw only six carries last game, but he was the goal line back, and that should surprise nobody. But Travis Homer had 12 yards on 11 carries, a real tough it out, gritty performance from a guy that many have never heard of before a few weeks ago. Marshawn Lynch had 7 yards on 6 carries. What was the one in there at the goal line? That's really the only question here. Like, is there enough for you to say, hey, well, at least he's going to get the goal line touches to consider him? Or is Seattle's backfield something that you're just staying far away from against the Packers?
I'm staying away from it. I get Marshawn Lynch should be in for increased workload after Homer was ineffective, to put it lightly, last week.
So was Lynch, though.
Yeah, that's it.
But I'm sorry. By the way, just so everyone knows, you're talking about Pete Carroll saying that Marshawn Lynch is ready for more carries, which I believe he said like a week or maybe 5 or 6 days ago.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I do think that he will get that increased work, but it's not for me. I like the Packers defense in this game. I think this is a lot of scenarios where this unfolds is a slow, methodical game. So if you're in a bind, you can take the shot and hope he's got to score. I think we all know that, but not really for me.
Okay. The backfield in Seattle for you. Any interest, Alex?
Yeah, I kind of like Homer. I think that in fantasy, the best spots are the ones where you can predict production where it hasn't been there. He's pretty cheap. I saw the ownership was sub 10% on him. And when you look at the snap counts from last week, he played about 75% to 25% for Lynch. So if Lynch sees more playing time, Homer's probably still going to be on the field more. So I think that this is just he's going to be on the field play. I don't feel great about his talent or anything like that. But if no one's on him, I'll take some shots.
Okay. Ben, by the way, I saw something kind of wild. Aaron Jones is only plus 225 to score 2 or more touchdowns.
Yeah, I mean, he seemingly does that seems like every week. That's not terrible. Total touchdown doesn't have to be on the ground.
Yeah, I guess so. Well, I'm saying plus 220. Yeah, I guess when you compare it to to someone like Devontae Adams at plus 550. It's, it just shows how dominant he's been, dominant a force he's been in terms of scoring this season.
Their ability to, it's unbelievable how much they force him into the end zone. 19 touchdowns on the ground is just massive.
Amazing. Plus 900 to score 3 or more touchdowns.
I like that more, but I don't know if he'll be going that nuts. But, again, you can take stabs just like with DFS. If you build to a narrative and you hit the narrative, you can be really effective.
For sure. All right, boys, let's close it out here and turn it over to the Live Before Lock crew. They'll take you up to lock. Seattle, outside of the run game, how are we approaching Russell Wilson and the pass catching options from Metcalf to Hollister to Tyler Lockett? Alex, you first, and then Ben, you can close us out.
I think that Lockett and Metcalf are both tremendous plays. Since the momentum's towards Metcalf, I kind of prefer Lockett. I think it's pretty much a coin flip there. The biggest advice I can give is just don't pick David Moore, because the reason why he got so much work last week was because Malik Turner and John Brown were out. They're in this week, so it's much more cloudy who's going to be in the rotation. And then Hollister's okay, but he doesn't stand out to me among the other tight ends.
Ben?
I lean Lockett just because I think recency bias has more people on Metcalf in life. But the way Wilson in this passing attack is constructed, you've got them. Hollister's kind of in a dead range for me at tight end. That's really all I'm doing with Seattle. I don't have a ton of exposure to the team as a whole, but Lockett would be my target if I had to pick one.
Okay. And hey, if you're not a premium sub, we do have some free premium content today. The NBA lineup builder is available on the site for free. NFL Showdown ownership projections as well worth checking out. And the NHL live blog by Nolan Kelly. All of that for free. Remember, 2020 will get you 20 days for $20, $1 a day. It expires after today. And New Year, all one word, is the promo code to get you $20 off, 20% off, $200 off an all-access annual platinum subscription to awesemo.com. Fellas, we've almost reached the end of the road. It's been fun doing these shows. I guess we'll still be doing one next week, I would imagine. But what's up?
It's going to be epic, because we're going to have to dive twice as deep here.
Oh, yeah. An hour on 2 games is going to be something everyone wants to stick around for. We appreciate, again, you guys hanging out with us every day. And we'll catch you back here next time on the final Deeper Dive presented by FantasyDraft.com. Live Before Lock coming up next.
All right, cool. Oh, okay. Sorry. I guess we're officially live, guys. Hello and welcome to Live Before Lock, Osmo.com. Chris Randone, Sal Vitri. Good afternoon, everyone. Sal, what's going on, man?
What's going on, my man? Yeah, I'm excited. 4 games, divisional round. Stakes are getting higher, both in real life, but also, we got the Millie Maker still going. This is fun.
Yeah, man. Looking at this slate, it's a little difficult, especially on DraftKings for those who are doing the 4-game slate as compared to maybe the 2-game slate offerings on FanDuel. But looking at, the quarterbacks, obviously, you can choose from a variety of pretty good options. But I think the biggest thing is, the pricing's pretty on point. It's really hard to kind of fit in a majority of top guys that you want without having to dive in and find some diamonds in the rough. But we'll go over that. First, we just want to go ahead and thank our sponsor, Yahoo Daily Fantasy Sports. For those of you who have not gotten involved with Yahoo Daily Fantasy Sports yet, I just played their NBA tournaments last night. They're still offering great tournaments. I think the basketball tournaments have gotten even better. Rinpack, for those of you that know, he took down the Yahoo NBA baller last night. So congratulations to him. But if you're looking to still get involved, don't forget, they give you the opportunity to really have a little bit better of competition when it comes to not a lot of the quote unquote NFL DFS sharks over there. So the promo code's AWESEMO, AWESEMO. You get $30 in Yahoo Sports Rewards points. It gets you like 3 entries into, one of those $10 tournaments. So if you haven't signed up yet, go over there and do so. And once again, thank you to our wonderful sponsor, Yahoo Daily Fantasy Sports. So we were mentioning it right before the game, right before this show. Some of the injuries in this first game that we're going to speak about, Vikings and San Fran. Before we get into it, Thielen and Diggs, both are going to play, both are going to suit up. You mentioned something on the other side with Quan Alexander and D Ford. Why don't we go ahead and break that down real quick?
Yeah, Quan Alexander is going to miss this one. If the team advances, he'll probably be back next week. But D Ford report came out that he'll play, but going to be on like a 15 to 20 snap count, which is about probably half the game or so. So that does help what you're going to get out of the Dalvin Cook running game there. Those are the main injuries on that defense for the most part. Lots of just injuries on some of the less publicized areas like offensive line for multiple of these games, as well as just also on the defenses, especially for teams like Seattle.
You mentioned also about this great safety play over here with the Vikings. And you mentioned about how, they really haven't allowed anything all season. Would love to hear your thoughts when it comes to this game, because obviously there's a lot of weapons here. We got both studs here at wide receiver for the Vikings. Probably a little bit questionable when it comes to Thielen, when it comes to his injury that he just sustained over in practice on Wednesday. But then you also have the running game with Dalvin Cook. And you mentioned with D Ford kind of only being limited to 15 to 20 snaps, maybe this can be somewhat of an option here where Vikings really trust in the running game like they did last week. And for someone who's at 24.9% ownership right now, how do you feel about him being there in the top 5 owned guys this week in this matchup against San Fran?
Yeah. So are you referencing Dalvin Cook for that?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think Dalvin Cook is fine at that spot. You have just a couple of other running backs ahead of him, mainly because of their salaries. Getting to him at $8,000, I would prefer him this week, at least projection-wise, over Derrick Henry. Even at the ownership levels, I think it's fine for the 4-game slate. It's nothing crazy. You do have some guys approaching 40%, some are at 40%, but being in that mid-20 range, I think it's completely fine. I have him for, again, another 20 or so touches in this game. You're getting a matchup against the San Fran defense that is much better, number 1 overall secondary, compared to being 11th against the run. We've touched on some of those injuries. The downside is that he's 7-point underdog, but he was the exact same size underdog, an 8-point underdog last week against a good run defense. You saw him in a game where they led for most of it, still see 5 targets, 3 receptions. If anything, you might see more of a target boost here, 6 or 7 for a guy who showed he can get active and be very effective in the passing game. So yeah, I think Dalvin Cook is one of the better and probably the safest type of play at running back on the slate if you're talking cash games.
Dalvin Cook, he's 8,000 on FanDuel. And then on DK, he's 8,000. I want to ask you this. When it comes to this game and the matchup, Kirk Cousins, obviously right now where he's kind of listed as far as ownership, he's at 5.5%. But I do want to get your thoughts on this game. It is the first game. And obviously it bodes well as far as whether maybe to compare to a game tonight. And we could speak on a 2-game slate perspective as well. But How do you think this game really turns out, Sal? Do you think Minnesota really has a shot at keeping it competitive, maybe controlling the ground like they did last week in New Orleans? Or do you see San Fran really having the not only the better offense, but really just being able to not let Dalvin Cook run and really control Kirk Cousins from doing anything with his arm?
Yeah, so I mean, I think it's the exact same game plan as last week, and you got to get up early in this one so you can kind of establish the type of play that you want to go about. It's just tougher. It's a, in my opinion, I mean, it's a better team than the Saints were, and I think we forget about how good the San Fran team is, really on both sides of the ball, just loaded with talent, even with these injuries. So it's going to be tough. Like when you reference just Cousins in the passing game, this secondary is elite. Like you talk about New England secondary all season, they were rivaling them as the number one secondary in the entire league. You have Sherman back and healthy. Quan Williams in the slot is going to be completely healthy. So it's a spot where, and Witherspoon as well on the outside, it's a spot where these guys are in tough matchups. And Diggs is picking up ownership, and rightfully so because of the price point. I think there was like a narrative that he was fussing on the sidelines, but then there's an actual camera like of him and what he was saying, and it was a complete opposite of what people were depicting. It was him saying, "You have to play your game, don't force it to me," to Cousins. So actually not being a diva as people were trying to say. So the whole like feed him squeaky wheel narrative is probably not there, but. Yeah, like 25% ownership. I'm not too thrilled with Diggs. I think he will end up seeing Sherman the most. Sherman does stay on the left side of the field, but it's just more so where Diggs is going to line up for most of that game. He's not going to move into the slot as Thielen might on some of their 3 wide receiver sets. So if you're talking like where my interests are outside of Dalvin Cook in the passing game, I'm not going to have any Kirk Cousins as of right now. I'll have about half the field on Diggs, but I would rather pivot to Thielen, who's a little bit more expensive. But either way, none of these guys stand out as any type of priorities outside of Cook.
San Fran's passing defense, just to kind of get some people up to date, but early in the year, they played phenomenal. I think there was a stretch where 6 or 7 out of those 8 or 9 first games, they really limited production from the wide receiver position. I think only in 2 of those games did wide receivers score 20 fantasy points or more. And I'm referencing the DK. But here, as I look, I just want to kind of break this to you. Over the last, I think it's 8 weeks, they struggled against the Cardinals, Seahawks, Cardinals, Packers, Saints, Falcons, Rams, all scoring opposing wide receivers, 30 DK points total or more. And in 4 of those 8 games, they scored over at least 40 plus. And so obviously I'm not saying here that, Kirk Cousins is a play. I think the focus is on what you just mentioned with Diggs getting and garnering ownership. And I think Thielen, people are scared of this injury. Obviously he got stitches in his foot. Now I don't know the severity of how risky it can be for him being on the field and running, and can those stitches open up and then it could really cause an issue. But I think it is taken to something into consideration, considering he is very low owned right now on DraftKings, and I think there is a little bit of upside there, a little bit of leverage play as well.
Yeah, and that's where I would go. Like I don't have any real strong interest, not as much as the field and Diggs right now. I get the price point where you're kind of starving for value, but I'll probably go elsewhere to find that value. And then Thielen is just the one that I would prefer if you're choosing in one lineup because of the ownership. Yeah, there's concerns about the injury, but I'll kind of take my chances there. Outside of that, I don't think you have to float for the tight ends in this one or fish for them. We'll get to tight end and really on each of these teams, but there's a really big gap between the top 4 and then even the top 2 tight ends on this slate. So trying to get to that 3K range, even if a guy scores 10, 12 points for you, that's really good for the price. But you have guys in the slate who are projecting close to 20 fantasy points in a lot of spots and have the ceiling of 30. So it doesn't even matter what those guys do at that point. So I'm just not really going to have any interest in like the Rudolphs or the Irv Smiths of the world.
What about the running backs here? Quite a bit of running backs to choose from. And as we go on through a majority of these other games here, obviously there's going to have to be guys that we pick that are low price to fit in roster. And I guess we'll start from the San Fran side because we already really spoke on Dalvin. But what is your take on Mostert and also Breida, Coleman? I mean, do we have any play for these low guys like Coleman and Breida, or is it just Raheem the only guy we can really focus on as far as the running game from San Fran?
Yeah, so I think for me, it would just be Raheem if we're looking at it. And I really don't have interest in him. I didn't at least to start the week, but ownership's starting to make it somewhat interesting. Like they still have 3 running backs out there. Matt Breida fumbled a couple of times in like week 15, I believe it was. And then he only ended up seeing like 8 total touches the next 2 weeks. I don't think he's going to be that involved. That can always change, but you maybe see around 5 touches for Breida, maybe see 8 to 10 for Coleman. And then you get like 12 to 14 for a guy like Mostert. And he's going to be quote unquote like the lead back, 50% of the touches and snaps. But at his price point, that's still not that great. But then you factor in that Damian Williams, who we'll get to, is a similar price range right there, $200 more, but double the ownership. And I think there's a good chance if McCoy is actually going to play today, like they've been resting him, that Damian Williams, like 16, 18 touch games can come down to that 12 to 14 touch game. And you're getting Damian Williams and Raheem Mostert looking, at least touch-wise and projection-wise, very similar at that point for me. And at half the ownership, then I think you can start pivoting to Mostert. But even then, I'm just going to probably get to different types of positions in terms of like the flex. So I think Mostert's a decent pivot off of Williams, but I think I'd rather go to some other wide receivers / tight ends.
And then for Dalvin Cook, I mean, for anyone who wants to know, Sal mentioned earlier how great San Fran's pass defense has been. However, though, their running defense is a little bit more, I guess you could say, pedestrian when it comes to it. They allowed opponents, I believe, 112.6 rushing yards per game, Sal, which ranks 17th in the league. And they ranked 23rd in the league, allowing 4.49 rushing yards per attempt. So, I mean, if we're going to see anything that we saw last week against a pretty stout defense in New Orleans, obviously this is their go-to guy in Dalvin Cook. And if they're able to establish that run early, I mean, obviously, the chalk is going to pay off here. But I do think that he's probably in a better spot than a lot of people think. And he is cheaper as well compared to Derrick Henry. But anything else in this game? And I think also, Sal, we should probably mention when it's a 2-game slate, you obviously maybe can look at a little bit more deeper. We have guys like Kendrick Bourne, maybe, Kyle Rudolph, who is somewhat of an option today on a two-game slate. But then also, Kyle Juszczyk, I mean, the fullback here. And these are dart throws. And I'm not saying that they're plays, but I am saying that they should be maybe considered in a player pool on a 2-game slate, because there is that going on FanDuel as well.
Yeah, it's worth mentioning that Minnesota Vikings probably close to a stud slot cornerback in Alexander is going to be missing this week, Mackenzie Alexander. So you'll get Kendrick Bourne in the slot primarily for 15, 20 routes run. Emmanuel Sanders will also go in there. So yeah, 3,700. Bourne is the cheapest wide receiver on this slate that I'd even consider. You're going to get 15, 20 routes, 3-4 targets, but against a backup cornerback, it's a better spot than it would be.
All right. Anything else from this game that we should maybe point or take note of before we go into this Tennessee Ravens game?
Yeah, I mean, I think the last thing is just that Kittle is going to have one of the more brutal matchups that you can have. Anthony Harris is number 1 in safety coverage in the league. Number 2 is his teammate Harrison Smith. Like, this Vikings secondary is not good when it comes to outside cornerback play, but when it comes to their safeties, it's as elite as it gets that we've seen in years past. So Kittle is the number 1 graded tight end from the season, and now he's facing the top 2 safeties. So he's not going to run all of his routes down the field. I imagine they scheme him to the sidelines in the intermediate range. So I wouldn't be too worried about that. I think Kittle is an elite play today. Both him and Kelsey are just underpriced for the slate.
Let's say Kittle is somewhat contained, and maybe the big plays aren't there, and maybe they not only have the safety help, but he's just kind of phased out of the offense per se. And this is a hypothetical, but who benefits in targets or at least production wise? Emmanuel Sanders, Debo Wilson, or even Kendrick Bourne. I mean, who would you think maybe gets more of the uptick from Garoppolo?
So I think it would be a little bit balanced, but if we're saying that Kittle is going to be on the line or in the slot, then or at least off the line, I think that Sanders and Bourne would benefit the most. Also, when you factor in that these safeties are so good, you're not going to beat them deep. I know that Deebo Samuel is cheap. He is a good play in my opinion, but when you factor in he's twice the ownership as his teammate Sanders, and Sanders will run more short and intermediate routes, if you're playing one lineup and you're already having a chalky lineup, I would much rather pivot, even if Kittle has a fine game, I would much rather pivot from Debo to Emmanuel Sanders just because he's half owned and he's going to, at least matchup wise, have a better matchup.
George Kittle, 6,200, 36.7% currently on the updated Osmo projections. And that's for the 4-game slate. So I can only imagine on the 2-game slate, what do you think? Probably 60, 70 percentile?
Yeah, that sounds about right.
Okay. All right. That'd be interesting. I mean, it definitely would be a leverage play if you're looking to fade there. We also have Mark Andrews on the slate, which we'll go into now. We'll go into this Ravens-Titans game in Baltimore. Now, I saw on Twitter today that there's a little bit of confusion with the weather. Ian Rappaport, other meteorologists getting into it as far as what the weather's really going to be like. As far as rain, is it going to be dry? What's your take on it, Sal? Have you looked into it a little bit more deeper?
No, not really. I mean, I've just really been tracking Vegas lines, and there's been no movement to the Vegas lines. And I guess just for all the viewers watching, just like the professionals in Vegas, how good they are at this. If they thought weather would really impact the game, you would see some sort of severe movement. For this game specifically, there's been a difference. As of right now, the live movement is just a half a point difference for the whole entire game, I believe. So nothing major here. All you're getting is actually San Fran's total has risen barely, and the Vikings total has dropped like a half a point. So yeah, the weather shouldn't impact this one.
Over under 47.5. Baltimore 10-point favorites currently. Second highest over under out of these 4 games. Obviously, 47.5 is pretty high, Sal. So production wise, I mean, let's talk about this Titans offense real quick. We saw what Derrick Henry did last week against New England, against a very, pretty strong defense. And I mean, there was really nothing there from the passing game. I mean, it was Derrick Henry and Derrick Henry only. 34 attempts, 182 yards, got in the end zone. And then he also had that nice big catch where I believe he was down at the 1 yard line. But let's talk about Derrick Henry real quick. I mean, going into this right now, his updated ownership, 16.6%. How do you feel about that, man?
Yeah, it's definitely low ownership. I mean, it's not enough to really get me off of Dalvin Cook. Like, look, they're both pretty big underdogs. They're both going to be coming on the road, and it's a spot where Henry's matchup is definitely better, but not that much better. It's a spot that if these teams both get behind big, Cook's just going to grade out as a better one, and just not a crazy different ownership. So I think it's okay where the ownership is. I would honestly, once again, probably come in below it. But you can expect around 24 carries, even in a game where they're down 1 to 2 scores. It's just this secondary is going to be really difficult to throw against for Tannehill, especially when you factor in the weapons he has. I mean, Jonnu Smith in the middle of the field will have a fine matchup. A.J. Brown will not have a good matchup, but he's a good player. And Corey Davis, I think, will probably just get shut down again. So it's a spot that I'm projecting around 26 carries for Henry. He has a positive run blocking advantage. Baltimore's around middle of the pack in run defense, 15th overall to end the year, 12th in tackling. So it's just a matter of, does this game stay close? This Baltimore team, again, I think we forget due to the bye week, is elite, and they've beaten teams pretty badly, similar to how Tennessee has played. The total does seem high. I really do lean towards the under. Both of these teams just want to run the ball 30 plus times, throw the ball like 15 to 20 times, you would imagine, somewhere around 20, 25 at most. So I think they're going to lose a possession each. In this type of game, I'm definitely with the public. I'm not going to have as much Derrick Henry. I'll probably have less than that 16%. But again, you see what he does. He projects out badly in all projections. So yeah, anybody who uses an optimizer probably doesn't get him. But if the game does stay close, he's going to carry the ball 30 plus times, and nobody else on the slate is going to do that.
What do you think about the Ravens defensive backs, who are they're like smaller in size, I guess you would say. And I would say that the strength would be to kind of focus and force him probably in the middle, instead of allowing him to go outside and be able to break tackles. Because as we saw last week, no one could tackle him on New England, especially when he broke out to the outside. So I guess my question is to you is, do you think we could see a Titans offense where they really just try to, get the run game going on the outside, and where I think that they can leverage that and really avoid those middle linebackers? I think that if they force him inside, I don't think he's going to be able to run as much than he could on the outside.
Yeah, I think that's fair. And I think that's probably something that they'll probably scheme for. And yeah, at the end of the day, it just comes down to salary. And if like these game flows actually finally, since they're playing a more elite caliber of a team, then I would consider the Patriots compared to Baltimore. If the game flow finally goes that Tennessee does play from behind and maybe plays from 2 scores behind, you're going to see, instead of 34 carries like last week, like probably 20 to 24 carries. And that's just really hard to kind of eat that if you're not going to get that huge usage, because his passing game role, although you saw the screen last week and it probably should be higher, the coaches aren't giving him work there. It's just right now non-existent. So it is a concern. But yeah, you touched on the Ravens defensive backs. I mean, this unit is elite, not just their 3 cornerbacks, Earl Thomas back there, but they are undersized. Jimmy Smith right now is their biggest cornerback weight-wise, and he's still 20 pounds lighter than A.J. Brown. So if anything from this Tennessee team, and I really don't like it, but A.J. Brown, a really difficult matchup in the second unit, but he's going to have 20 pounds on the closest cornerback in size to him, and he has shown skill. So at $6,000, I think it's in play at lower ownership. But outside of that, I'm really not interested in like the Corey Davises or the Tajay Sharps. It's worth mentioning finally that Khalif Raymond did clear concussion protocol. He's a slot wide receiver for Tennessee. He'll probably run, I'd say, like 8 routes in this game, and Tajay Sharp will, I would imagine, stay ahead of him in the slot, but only for like 15 routes. So it just hurts both of them. Yeah,
I was going to say, that was going to be my next thing, is A.J. Brown's pretty big. And, it's going to be difficult for someone to really not only get jump balls with him, but just to be able to control his size. And I don't think really there's other options for Tannehill in this matchup. I really don't. I think it is a difficult one. I think they'll try, like the Vikings, to really keep it on the ground as much as they can. Focusing on the ground, let's go to the other side of the ball with Mark Ingram. How do we feel about this calf injury? Do you think he gets a full workload? Do we see them use him more than what we saw, to the regular season? Because when you look, I mean, he doesn't really hit 20 rushing attempts, because he didn't hit 20 rushing attempts all season long. really the way he pays off is if he gets into the red zone, because he does get quite a few red zone carries per game. And that's really all he does, because he doesn't hit 100 yards, only hit 100 yards 3 or 4 times out of the entire season. So I guess my question to you is, what do we do with Mark Ingram? And if not Mark Ingram, can we pivot to maybe a Gus Edwards? Is this a sneaky play?
Yeah, so I'm actually happy that it seems like, and I guess we'll get the official news soon, but it seems like all signs point to Mark Ingram going to play. But yeah, you touched on it. Like, he sees 15, 16 carries a game. Even if he's starting in limited, it can't drop that much. Is it 10 to 12 carries? So like, at his price point, I already didn't like him, but I like that he's playing, because it would have opened up great plays in Justice Hill and Gus Edwards. But so it would have opened that up for everybody. I like that it's a little bit of a difficult slate. If you're really doing your homework, I think it pays off more for you. So I'm happy that he's playing. I don't have interest at 6,700. When we're talking about getting like a lower owned back who fits the mold of like an Ingram and a Henry, I'd rather pivot to Henry, because I think there's just more upside. You can see double the amount of touches, if not triple, from Henry than you get from Mark Ingram this week. So I'm not going to right now, at least in 20 maxes, 3 maxes, single entry, I have no Mark Ingram. I also don't have his backups though. So I'm going to stay away from that. This game in general for me though, it's just really unappealing. There's 1 or 2 spots that I'm willing to get some of, but not overwhelming ownership on anything. The guys behind him, I think Edwards sees 8 to 10 touches. Justice Hill sees 4 to 5 as long as Ingram is active.
Yeah, the only thing I'm thinking is if, something does tweak with Ingram, I mean, then we're going to see more of a workload for Gus Edwards, which could benefit, especially on a 2-game slate like today, but even a 4-game slate. I mean, he is cheap. And, if you're looking to fit in maybe some of those higher priced wideouts, just maybe someone to put in consideration. I guess quarterback, Lamar Jackson. I mean, what do we do here? It's really hard not to like him in any shape, way, or form, especially with the running game. So how do you feel about Lamar Jackson? Is he your number 1 rated quarterback on this slate?
So he's not, and it's actually, it might shock some people, but he's like barely cracking being my 3rd/4th option, and a lot of it's just due to salary. He's great. Yeah. He projects out as a guy who, right now I have him and Mahomes very close, so that's why I do favor Mahomes by a wide margin in terms of my rosters for just pure points. I had Deshaun Watson for less points, but I also know that he's $1,700 cheaper. So point per dollar, I have Watson as a better play. And then I have Lamar filtering in right there with Rodgers and Wilson after him. So he's not my favorite quarterback in my 3-max single entry. I have none of him. I have all Mahomes and Watson right now. In 20 max, I am going very heavy on Mahomes and Watson. I also have no Lamar Jackson in that. It's an aggressive stance. So I was playing 150, I would have some, but yeah, he's fine to get to. On a short slate, I still do think you should be trying to stack, even though you don't have to because he runs a ton. But I would want to have him with one person in there. It's just, it makes it that much easier to win these slates when you get any sort of correlation from him. The problem is all of his receivers are like the same thing, 15 routes, 2 or 3 targets. So I think you look to Andrews there, but he's a fine play. You just have to prioritize him. And on a slate where you have 3 elite wide receivers, 2 elite, I would say, running backs, and maybe even 3 up there in the price range, it's just really hard to want to prioritize him when you can save almost $2,000 for a similar talent, especially point per dollar wise, in a guy like Watson.
Well, let's talk about his weapons real quick, because you just mentioned a great thing. It's hard to trust any of the wide receivers. I mean, let's just throw this out there. Excuse me. Outside of Andrews, I mean, probably the most consistent option for him. Hollywood Brown is even someone who's been really inconsistent. It's hard to trust really what you're going to get out of him. A couple targets, maybe. And other than that, though, I mean, he's playing half the time on the field. But, I mean, he is garnering a lot of ownership this week. He's coming in at the top 10. He's 23.5% on DraftKings at 4,400. I mean, is this just a price play? Because, I would love to hear your thoughts on not only this matchup, but, if not Brown, I mean, who else is Lamar going to throw it to outside of his tight ends?
Yeah, I mean that's the thing though. Like, does Lamar have to throw it? I think they run 35 times in this game. I think Lamar tries to throw it 20 times, and we've seen that happen for half of their games this year. So yeah, I saw the ownership on Brown. I think it's in the syllabus on Awesemo that we all did. I think he was my fade of the week. It's just really high ownership. I get it. He's cheap. I like some other guys in that same price range we'll talk about in the next games, but look, the last 5 games for Hollywood Brown, 11 catches, 65 yards, and a touchdown. I mean, those are brutal stats. Those are really bad stats. And this team doesn't drop back a lot. They're running a ton. So he's running like 16 routes per game this year. None of that's great. And then you factor in that, yeah, it's a nice matchup. Adore Jackson was practicing. He should suit up for this one. Not the greatest cornerback, but he's the best cornerback that the Titans have. it's a spot where, for me, the ownership is all because of price. And I think a lot of people still somehow are fixated on like his week 1 huge game. But outside of since week 3 and week 4, he's been dealing with lower body injuries. I mean, his performance clearly, for me at least, has to be, 1, they don't throw a lot, not a lot of volume, but 2, he just seems very injured right now if you just watch him run his routes. So for me, a guy was seeing 5.6 targets per game, and almost a third of those are really skewed from the first month of the season. It's a spot that I right now don't have any of him. And I get it. It's because he's cheap. But if you're going to take a chance on one of these cheap guys, they all seem very similar to what Brown's been doing over the last month or two. So I'd rather just get one at lower ownership.
And I guess we'll just touch on, for the 2-game slate purpose, tight ends. Obviously, Mark Andrews, a little bit banged up, but looks like he is going to give it a go. What about Hayden Hurst, Nick Boyle? Just cheap guys that maybe you can fill on the flex or the tight end spot. Any of these guys of somewhat consideration?
I think they become really interesting on not the main slate, but maybe the 2-game slate, but really just the showdown slate. They're both really cheap on the showdown slate. And I think it was Hurst who's actually cheaper than Boyle there, but they run like the same amount of routes every week. So I would give the edge to Hurst in really any format if you go there, but probably more so on the showdown.
All right. Anything else in this game before we go on to the Sunday games?
No, this is the least appealing game to me. In like my 3 max and single entry, I have none of these players. In 20 max, I'm getting like 1 or 2 lineups of AJ Brown, like 1 lineup of Lamar Jackson right now, but I might not even end up with that. So yeah, they're not appealing. Like Mark Andrews would be the biggest thing for me on Baltimore, but you have a slate where he's right next to Kittle and Kelsey and projects out nowhere near them for me. So it's pretty much a full fade of this game for me.
Man, you wild today, Sal. You're wild, man. I'm just, I get it. I mean, I do like this. I do like the Sunday games a little bit more, but I do think there's some a little bit of value here and a little bit of guys that in these Saturday games today that have a little bit of potential. Before we go into the Sunday games, though, there's a little bit of mix up with the sponsor. There was also the super draft that you guys might have saw, and now I think it's changed to the fantasy draft, if I'm not mistaken. But fantasy draft is today's sponsor of the show. My mistake. And there is time still, 33 minutes left. If you're looking to get into the 75,000 Hooters main event, there's still a little bit of spots left. $25 entry free. As you know, fantasy draft, it's the only rake-free daily fantasy website. 100% of the entry fees are paid out to the winner 100% of the time. So if you haven't gone over there yet, use the promo code AWESEMO. And also, here's the thing, keep in mind, you can play up to $100 in entry fees for free per month. But after that, they do have like a little bit of a subscription-based tier program, which isn't bad because at the end of the day, as you guys know, I think Alex Baker has mentioned it multiple times about how much a player loses his bankroll to the rake. I forget the exact number. Do you remember the number, Sal?
I think it was close to
30%. Yeah, about 30%. So, for all of us here, if you're keeping being mindful of your bankroll management, obviously you got to take and rake into consideration. So head over to this wonderful sponsor of Fantasy Draft, and we thank you guys for supporting us yet again. All right, the Sunday games. Here we go. Texans Chiefs, 51.5 over under right now, Sal. 10-point favorites for the Chiefs. I got to say, man, Damian Williams, 41% ownership right now, 6,000 on DraftKings, and on FanDuel, he's 6,900, 36.7%. But he is coming up as, the general consensus most chalkiest player. How do we feel about this?
Yeah, I mean, it looks good. I think there are question marks around it, though. So I was surprised to see him this highly owned. Again, we talked about it. Like, the slate does not have a lot of value. I do think that I actually do think it's relatively easy to make lineups depending on how you make it. You can't jam in 3 or 4 or 7K plus guys. It's just not that type of value, but there's decent mid-range options at every single position, and tight ends pretty much just a mid-range everywhere. No really priced up guys. But Williams at 40+%, I'm interested to see if it comes close to 50% by lock. Yeah, I mean, whenever a guy's that highly owned, especially in these huge tournaments like the Millie Maker, you can surely get off of him. Like, he's no lock. He's 6,000. He's not a $4,000 running back. It's not like he doesn't have guys behind him. As long as, and this is the risk, like if LaShawn McCoy is healthy and all the things that they've been saying, we've been using him for the regular season, we're waiting for him for the postseason. You had LaShawn McCoy inactive, healthy scratch because of that maintenance in week 16. Week 17, he was healthy, but didn't see a touch. And then after the fact, they just said that was the plan. So who knows? If he's actually going to be out there, well, then you take in and maybe he sees 10 touches. And now Williams is back down to his 12 to 14 touch role. And at 6K, he looks very much like Raheem Mostert at half the ownership. So I have a good amount of Williams right now, but there's definitely uncertainty here, like a lot more than this ownership number is indicating.
Williams, facing this Texans team, I mean, they struggled basically all year against the run. They were not good at stopping at that whatsoever. Allowed 121 0.1 rushing yards per game on the ground during the regular season, ranked 25th in the league. Then they also surrendered 4.8 yards per carry, a little bit more than San Fran on the ground, which ranked 27th. But I think here's the thing, though. I guess one thing that does concern me, and tell me if I'm wrong here, kind of when I think about it, but him being such high ownership, is it guaranteed that they run? Or, I mean, could we see Pat Mahomes really do his thing here in the passing game? And then really that's how they get their points.
Yeah. So, I mean, just since he's like active in both departments, I think that he's fine regardless of if they're going to run or not in this one. It's a good matchup for him out of the backfield as a pass catcher or just on the ground against Houston's defensive line. My major concern is just like the touch count. Like I have him projected for 16 touches right now, but if LaShawn McCoy comes in and instead of seeing 6 that I have McCoy projected for, sees 10, well, that's directly pulling from Damian Williams. So yeah, if Williams was like 25% owned, I'd be like, okay, that's a fine play. And I still think it is a fine play, but once you start getting 40% in this crazy ownership and there is uncertainty, and I think there's a good amount of it around him, then yeah, I think that if you're playing one lineup, you can consider to start to fade him. I do have him in a lot of my lineups, but something I'm going to be taking a look at, especially after these first couple of games start in terms of late swapping.
Any love for LaShawn McCoy as far as the running game is concerned, or maybe even Darwin Thompson? Are we even considering that?
So I'm not going to, but I do want to try and see overnight news and anything if we can get any sort of early read on if McCoy is, one, going to be active, which I assume he will be, but 2, if he's going to be having a significant role in the offense.
Let's talk about this Texans passing game real quick. Deshaun Watson, 6,700, 12.4% currently on DraftKings, and 11.5% for FanDuel. Where are we going, or what are your takes on this passing game for the Texans? I mean, I don't know if they're going to be able to run per se. I do think that we could see them being down and maybe Duke Johnson maybe being a little bit more of a valuable option compared to Carlos Hyde. But I know you can run on the Chiefs, but I just feel like they're going to try to force Watson to really make plays. I mean, I could be wrong, but I see them being down and I see them having to play from behind. And so let me ask you this. I mean, is Watson high up there on your radar considering Lamar Jackson's really nowhere to be found?
Yeah. Watson right now is right behind Mahomes. They're taking up pretty much almost all of my ownership at quarterback. I'm being very concentrated in the ways that I'm building lineups. But yeah, I like Watson this week. He historically plays better just playing from behind. He will have Will Fuller back. Will Fuller, they say, is still having some, not setbacks, but just limitations from his groin injury. So that's not great to hear, but at least it can't be that much worse than Kenny Stills on the outside. So Stills back in the slot has been better for Stills this season. I think the offense should look good today. I mean, they're going to be more than a touchdown underdogs. Like I said, Watson's better on the road. You have KC. Right now, their pass rush is going to seem a lot worse than it is because for most of the year, they were missing some of their top guys like Chris Jones up front. So they'll rank as like a bottom 5, bottom 10 pass rush. But if you had to rank them out right now with the personnel they have, they're probably around middle of the pack in that and improving. Secondaries around middle of the pack as well. You just get the rushing upside from Watson. It's a spot where overall, I think they're going to have to pass, like you said. If you get Duke Johnson on the field more, hopefully that should help them. So yeah, I think Watson's in a really good spot here. And then you just factor in his price point of 6,700 is hard to ignore.
I feel like, we'll talk on a minute in a little bit, but I want to ask you about Will Fuller because clearly we don't really know what to expect with this guy because he's so brittle. And I mean, any type of tweak, any type of touch, it seems like he just takes himself out of the game and it's over with, which has hurt a lot of us here in the DFS community. So who are you pairing him up with the most as far as Watson is concerned? And also, I mean, looking at Fuller right now, I just want to kind of break down his ownership. He's 20% on FanDuel. Obviously, his price is just outstanding. And then he's 18.3% on DraftKings. So give us kind of your overall consensus as how you feel about Will Fuller and as far as where you rank these wide receivers between Stills, Hopkins, and Fuller in this matchup.
Yeah, so Fuller, there's definitely concerns. I mean, we've seen it twice this year. He's had to leave games early. The one time he played like 5 snaps and had to leave because he injured the groin and a hamstring. And it's been the story with him for 2 or 3 years now. But I think it's built into the price at $5,000. He's very affordable. He's averaging 7 targets per game. If you factor in that Watson might have to throw 20 to 25% more than usual here, well, now you're starting to think, even if he's injured, maybe those 7 targets, but upside of 8 or 9 targets for Fuller, he'll see more one-on-one coverages if they go to double team DeAndre Hopkins. Fuller being back, it doesn't help Hopkins from just an overall volume standpoint, but from seeing less double teams, it helps him. So I do think it helps the whole offense just having him out there, even if it is a decoy. But for fantasy purposes, yeah, I think he'll see the targets as long as he's healthy. And I am okay taking chances on this. I mean, you have him at half the ownership as a guy like Deebo Samuel. I think he has a much higher ceiling than Deebo Samuel if he is out there. You have lower ownership relative to the just other guys at the position and price and you have a low price point. So at 5,000, I think it's worth, at least for me, taking the chances here. You have a really impressive 14.3 air yards per target on him. He's just a big play receiver that all he needs is 1 or 2 plays, even if he is injured.
Arrowhead, tough environment. And like I said, mentioned earlier, I think they will be playing from behind. I think the Chiefs just have a lot of firepower on offense that just might be too much for the Texans to hold off on, especially on the road. But the pass defense for the Chiefs is a little bit interesting compared to the past because this year, Sal, they've only allowed one 100-yard wide receiver all season. And so, obviously, if you're going to beat the Chiefs, maybe you have to run, but I'm not a believer in the running game of the Texans. And so, I know you're high on Watson. And I just want to ask, do you think there's really just a really shut down game from this Chiefs defense? And do you like the Chiefs defense as far as being devil's advocate in any sense on this 4-game slate?
Yeah, I do like the Chiefs defense. I have some Chiefs defense. Their pass rush has improved, and this stadium is one of the best home field advantages, and they play extremely better, especially on defense, as you would imagine at home. So yeah, I think they're definitely in play here in lineups where you're not probably playing Watson and some of those guys. But it's a spot that, yeah, I'm not too concerned. They have been a lot better this year. Breeland, who's been just a journeyman cornerback, has been great. He'll probably see Hopkins. That's a great matchup for Hopkins. Their safety play has been strong. And then Tre'Davious Ward has probably been their best cornerback this year. I imagine he'll end up being on Fuller just based on the skill set of Fuller. But yeah, I still think Hopkins is a fine play. Out of those top 7K plus wide receivers this week, he would be my third option if you're just choosing a one-off. But when I'm rostering Watson, my first priority is to get Hopkins in there and then Fuller after that. I'm not getting much of Stills right now. I think Stills is just preemptively priced as if Hopkins wasn't going to be in. He's 4,800 if Fuller wasn't going to be in. If we knew Fuller was going to be in from, say, a week ago, I think Stills would be somewhere in that low 4K range. So you're paying a premium for a different role, and I don't really like that all that much.
Before we talk about the weapons for the Chiefs, tight end spot, Fells, Atkins, if he plays, any love for these two cheap tight ends?
So, it'll probably be the same answer. If anything, it would be Fells for me. But in this range, I would even prefer guys like Rudolph from Minnesota and their matchups in the middle of the field. But it's really just the same answer of like those top probably 4 guys in the pricing at tight end this week. And then really the top 2 in the 6K range. It's just like tiers of how much points projections you could really expect and then the ceiling. So even if a guy like Fells has a touchdown and 20 yards and has like 8 to 10 points, it seems like a success for you. But Kelsey and Kittle can blow that out of the water with a projection of 20 or just a ceiling of like 30 this week. And it makes it really hard to see any upside out of those types of plays.
Well, I will say this. I do like Duke Johnson playing from behind. I think there's some pass catching opportunities there. He's cheap. And I know we can look at game logs and talk about Carlos Hyde and what he did earlier in the year at Kansas City. He ran the ball 26 times for 116 yards. And I know that this is a way to beat them, but I just don't foresee Kansas City really having that type of defense come tomorrow, especially with how strong their pass defense is. Could probably see them box up a little bit more. And that was an injury-prone defense earlier in the year. We could probably see them stack the box more. But I do like Duke Johnson just as the last guy to speak off from the Texans. Going on to the other side, though, Sammy Watkins, man. What have you done for me lately? Because he hasn't done anything. He had 3 touchdowns all year. They came in the first week of the season, 18.3%. He's 4,300. A lot of those guys like Denard Robinson and Mecole Hardman, they're kind of right there too with him as well as far as price is concerned. Sammy Watkins, man, is this a legit just price play, or is this a reasonable chalk play?
Yeah, so I think it's all because of pricing. And this is the one that I'm okay getting behind a little bit more as opposed to Hollywood Brown. I think just in general, you're going to see Mahomes throw for 15 more times than Baltimore and Lamar Jackson are going to throw for. So if you're trying to compare those similar wide receivers, Sammy Watkins, the targets have been coming down very similar to Hollywood Brown in that game, but it's a spot where he's still averaging above 6, closer to 7 targets per game this season. A lot of that is the first 8 games of the year, which is a concern, especially with Tyreek Hill being out for those. The other major thing since week 1, when Tyreek got hurt, they ended up moving Sammy Watkins into the slot, and he's pretty much stayed there. So the big play upside, it's just not there out of the slot, as opposed to being on the outside like Tyreek, like Hardman, and like Robinson. So I think Watkins sees maybe around 5-6 targets. You're hoping for a game of like 4 or 5 catches in that 50-60 yard range is somewhere where I'm projecting him, maybe a little bit less. So at 4,300, I think it's fine. I do have Sammy Watkins shares, especially in those Mahomes lineups as well. This is the one piece of value that, at least at wide receiver, that I feel okay about. And it's really just because the way that this game goes, I think I think right now the Chiefs are going to be throwing probably around 35 to 40 times. And I think that just gives Sammy Watkins a target floor of around 4 or 5 with the upside of 6.
Kelsey, man, 6,400. Kind of cheap in my opinion. I just feel like it's really hard to get away from, I know he's 39.7% owned, but on a 4-game slate, that really doesn't matter. I just feel like he's such a great option at tight end this week. I mean, how do you fade him in this situation?
Yeah, I don't know how you fade him. And here's the thing for me on this slate in general. And you're seeing it. Both Kittle and Kelsey have a ton of ownership. We talked about Kittle's really difficult matchup, but it's easy to avoid safeties if you're a tight end. And hopefully his offensive coordinator and his coach, who is a very good one at that, and Shanahan just schemes him to not go up against them. So I think Kittle's a fine play. And then you have Kelsey at a similar price range. I slightly prefer Kittle, but they're both right there projecting for like 18 fantasy points or so for me. But it's a spot that Kelsey is just too cheap. If you told me these guys were 7,500, it makes it more difficult. But I think it just screams out 2 tight end week in cash. And even in tournaments, Kelsey and Kittle combination make a lot of sense here. I do prefer Tyreek Hill in the receiving core if you're just trying to ask for like one guy to stack with Mahomes in tournaments, just because of how crazy high his ceiling is and a good matchup. But I have a lot of ownership to all these Chiefs guys, and Kelsey is just a great play at that price point.
Yeah, I think I agree with you. I think Tyreek Hill is the best option out of the wide receiver core, even regardless of price. I mean, 7,600, I'm okay with that. I mean, more speed than John Brown, and definitely can really open up the game as far as the field is concerned. So I don't doubt that Tyreek Hill will get quite a few bomb opportunities. And I mean, obviously his ownership, 28.4%, don't mind it. I mean, it only the ownership's not that crazy when you think about it. It's pretty well balanced out this week. So anywhere you go, it's not going to be too concentrated. I think once you get into the higher stakes, that's when it comes to a lot concentrated. But, in these smaller dollar tournaments, the field's open, man. So I definitely don't mind paying up for Tyreek Hill and Kelsey and even rolling it back with Mahomes. Anything else from this game before we go into the final game?
No, I think that's it. Yeah. I like from this game in terms of the passing options, Hill, Kelsey, and Watkins in that order. I have a good amount of them. Just we talked about Damian Williams' ownership earlier, probably going to be the highest projected player. And there is uncertainty around that. So if you're somebody watching this right now and going that you don't really feel comfortable wanting to roster Damian Williams for any reason, there's definitely uncertainty depending on what LaShawn McCoy's touches look like. So him being that highly owned is definitely a price play, probably a bit of a recency bias play. And a lot of people just expecting McCoy not to have a role in this offense. But I think there's going to be a role for him. So don't be afraid to just make different stances if you feel that way.
How many touches do you think he might get in the offense?
McCoy?
Yeah.
So I have him projected for 6 right now, and that's something that I don't feel great about. But I'm not getting I'm getting a good amount of Damian Williams, not the 40% that the field's getting, but I'm getting under. I'm in the 30% range just because of the price. But I haven't projected for 6, but I think there's a real chance he can see 10. And if he sees 10, that's a big swing because you're now getting those guys splitting the workload in the backfield as opposed to a really big split of a 10 touch difference.
Okay, other than that, I don't have much more to say about this game. Let's go into this final game, Sal, before we go ahead and close this out. We got about 15 minutes left before this first game starts. Seahawks Packers, 45 over under. Just coming in third as far as the over under totals here of these 4 games. Green Bay, 4-point favorite. I kind of like this game a lot, man. It's going to be cold. It's going to be a Lambeau Field type atmosphere. You got to love that. But I must say, man, there's a lot of great options as far as Seattle is concerned. But I will say, I would love to hear your side, and then I would love you to kind of talk about the Packers defense because, one, they do blitz a lot. They do have a great pass rush. And two, I will say this. They got a pretty good pass defense, man. I'm just curious to see how they kind of fade out these 2 wideouts in DK Metcalf and Lockett.
Yeah, I think this is a very interesting game. I think there's just a lot of lower ownership across the board in it. A lot of the guys are priced to where they should be in this game, so it makes sense. I think it's really efficient pricing, but a couple of guys are standing out to me. So just starting on the Packers side, like you said, with the defense, yeah, it's a spot where they're a top 5 pass rush. They have the number 1 overall pressure rater in the league in Zadarius Smith, number 13 in Preston Williams, and number 23 in Kenny Clark. So their defensive line is elite. Kenny Clark is questionable for this one, but he's the only Packer on either side of the ball questionable. So they're going to come in pretty much fully healthy in this one. Their defense does match up really well. You have 2 injuries. Mike Ipati is probably going to miss this one he's a guard for Seattle. Dwayne Brown is a game time decision, truly questionable. He's a left tackle. So a lot of injuries on this offensive line for Seattle. Even with those guys in, and one of them is definitely not going to be in, they rank 30th in pass protection. Wilson's going to be running for his life. Now, the idea there is he's a magician. Can you actually take him down, or will he extend the play? And that helps guys like Lockett and Metcalf. So it's not going to be a good day for in terms of timing and a stable pocket for Russell Wilson. So that usually makes me worried for these pass catchers, but he is, like I said, really good at eluding those pressures. So it could actually work in his benefit. So yeah, the Packers defense is a play in fantasy. I actually like that a lot as 4-point home favorites here, 4.5 in some spots, and just a really good offensive line versus defensive line matchup for them. In terms of the Seattle weapons in that case, I'm getting some Russell Wilson, some Rodgers. They're like my third and fourth quarterbacks that I'm rostering in some of the like 20 max type lineups. But it's like sprinkles of them, nothing major there. DK Metcalf is priced up. A matchup against Kevin King is not terrible for him. It's very neutral. I don't have a strong stance on DK Metcalf. The only thing I would say is he's $600 cheaper than a guy like DeAndre Hopkins. And if you can get there, I would much rather get to Hopkins. Tyler Lockett will have a much tougher matchup. Tramon Williams is giving up less than 2 receptions and 20 yards per game in the slot in coverage. And then if you take Lockett out of the slot, well, now you have the best quarterback on the Packers in Jair Alexander. So tough matchups for the receiving core. I actually like Jacob Hollister the most. The issue there becomes Kelsey and Killer in a lot of my lineups. So trying to get that third tight end, third tight end then is not possible on these slates unless you're playing somewhere on like fantasy draft. But at $4,000, Jacob Hollister is a really good option in my opinion. Packers really struggle to cover tight ends.
You know, they've been somewhat vulnerable this year from time to time against the run, as far as the Packers D is concerned. But I got to be honest with you, Sal, I don't trust the Seattle running game at all when it comes to either Homer or Marshawn Lynch. Marshawn Lynch, what are you going to get? 9, 10 carries possibly. Hopefully maybe he gets a red zone carry to kind of pay off. But I mean, outside of that, though, I really think that Seattle needs Russ to be Russell Wilson and let him just do whatever he needs, please, in order for them to even have a chance at winning. It's just, for me, I do like Lockett a little bit more than DK Metcalf this week. Maybe that's because he is a little bit more cheaper. But you mentioned a great point. It's like these guys aren't really garnering that much ownership compared to the other games, which does give you somewhat leverage, and it is the last game. And, obviously that's something to take into consideration. But I just don't foresee how they can run. And that's why I do like Seattle a little bit more, because I feel like they do have to pass. I think if you're looking for a guy that is somewhat cheap, I think David Moore is interesting to fill in there. He did have 2 big catches last week for almost 60 yards. I mean, but if he can get into the mix, I think he could definitely pay off value at a cheap price. The Packers side of the ball is kind of where, obviously we got to talk. Aaron Jones, Devontae Adams, Aaron Rodgers at home in the postseason. Now, Devontae Adams is his right-hand man, right? They, this year I know that they had plans for, Geronimo Allison to be like this big-time slot wideout. Didn't happen. We only have Lazard as another option as far as the pass game, and he's cheap. So what's your take here on this Packers offense, and where do you attack them most as far as where do you see the most optimal plays being at?
Yeah, so I think, it's like the studs there in terms of Adams and Aaron Jones. The ones that you would think, the ones that are picking up ownership are the ones I have the most interest in. So it's nothing really shocking, but Shaq Griffin, he's been a top 10, in some categories, top 5 cornerback this year, according to Pro Football Focus for Seattle. He stays on the left side of the field 96% of the time. So he doesn't shadow. They haven't shadowed once this whole season, Seattle. So Devontae Adams will easily avoid him. Just don't put him on that side of the field, put him in the slot, put him on the right side of the field. So Adams will be fine. That's really good news for the Packers. They don't have to worry about a star cornerback being on their star wide receiver. So big matchup boost there. Adams is behind Tyreek Hill as my favorite pay-up option at wide receiver on the slate. So I prefer Adams over the Lockett's, Metcalfs, and Hopkins right now. But on the opposite side of that, that means that Allen Lazard, who's running the most routes behind Adams at wide receiver, is, for lack of a better word, going to be sacrificed pretty much to the side of the Shaq Griffins this week. So he's cheap. Earlier in the week, his ownership was closer to 20, so I didn't like it at all. I still don't like it at 14%. He's 4,500. I would prefer Sammy Watkins. He's seen a lot of targets the last 2 games, but keep in mind, Rodgers has thrown 95 times in week 16 and 17. He usually throws, in those 2 games, he'll usually throw 66 times, 33 times a game. So instead of those 17 targets that you were seeing out of Lazard, expect more around 5 or 6 in this game. And in the matchup against Shaq Griffin, it's just not a spot I want to get to. So I do like Adams a lot. Aaron Jones, for me, just point per dollar wise at running back, aside from Damian Williams, is probably one of the better options and safer options for all formats on the slate. I have a lot of Aaron Jones right now. He is up there, I believe, is my highest owned running back. This is a team that ranks just 28th in tackling, and Aaron Jones has been one of the best players in the entire league at any position at breaking tackles. He's a top 5 running back in pass catching skills, and I think he's going to be the second most targeted player on the team today. You could also factor in that he's going to get almost every single red zone rush. Jamal Williams will be back. I'm projecting 10 touches there. I'm projecting 17 for Aaron Jones. So Jones is my favorite play from the Packers. Then Adams. I have a little bit of Aaron Rodgers here. I think that's an underrated stack of the 3 of those guys, but nothing else after that.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I do have some Lazard as just like a small filler amongst my lineups. I think Devontae Adams is one of definitely the best plays possible. Aaron Rodgers, somewhat interesting, but it scares me because he doesn't have necessarily the plethora of weapons you would want as far as a quarterback is concerned. I think that holds weight on a lot of Devontae Adams in order for Aaron Rodgers to get there. And also, get there compared to these other guys who are kind of in the same price range. I think Deshaun Watson at 6,700 on DK, I'd rather just pay 200 more and go with Deshaun Watson there. However, though, Aaron Jones, you mentioned it best, point per dollar wise compared to Damian Williams. Love that. I think, his 27.4% ownership is nothing to be fearful of. He's in a great spot. Seattle has given up the 11th most rushing yards surrendered this entire year. So a lot of vulnerability there on the defensive side. Other than that, though, do we look at tight end at all? Do we look at Jimmy Graham? Is there any Jimmy Graham love whatsoever at tight end when we talk about this position?
Yeah, it's very similar to the Rudolphs and the Darren Fells. Like Jimmy Graham will show up in some games. He'll show up once out of every 4 or 5 games. You'll get more than that 2 or 3 reception game. But I do think he's going to have to be used more. And this is the thing, though. They're going to try and scheme in Aaron Jones. With Jamal Williams back, they'll try and scheme him into the passing game. Without a doubt, Adams will see those 10 to 12 targets, if not more. The left side of the field will be very much shut down because of Shaq Griffin and just really bad wide receiver play for the Packers. So in theory, Jimmy Graham should be used more, but we've been saying that all year. Hopefully this is a chance you maybe see him step up a little bit more. But at that price point, I don't know what you're really hoping for. He hasn't been seeing the targets. He's also been dropping passes, struggling with separation. It's a spot where I'm really not trying to get to Jimmy Graham. On the 2-game slate, though, I think he's a little bit more appealing, especially where you can roster those 2 tight ends. But on this 4-game main slate, it's not a spot that I'm getting to.
Anything else that maybe we should speak about this game? I do, in a weird way, I do think this game could score a lot of points. I really do. With 2 quarterbacks that can definitely have the willpower to throw and make big plays happen. I think we saw that last week with Metcalf as well. Multiple long yardage plays through the air and even locking on some. I think this does have the capability of doing so. Ownership doesn't necessarily state that. But I think it is a game to maybe just keep in mind that could hold that potential just based on how these 2 offenses can work and both can explode essentially. But anything else that maybe we should focus on or anything that we missed outside of this game?
Yeah, so I'll touch on Seattle's backfield quick. Last week you had Marshawn Lynch seeing 3 targets. He had 2 catches. There's actually something to that. At first I didn't think there was. Then Pete Carroll was asked about it, and he said, yeah, we want to get Marshawn more involved in that aspect, and you'll continue to see that. So, we're expecting this week Marshawn to have that type of role, which makes no sense. Travis Homer is definitely the more athletic back, the more in shape back even, and probably the better back for those plays. But that just makes Homer not even in play for me if you hear those types of things. They do have a lot of faith in Marshawn. I don't know why at this point, but it's a spot where they have a bad offensive line. You have some bad running backs behind that offensive line. It's not great. But the one thing I will say, and it's a huge risk on the 4-game slate, something that you need to look at for showdown and 2-game slate. Kenny Clark, I mentioned it earlier, he's very much questionable for the Packers. He is like their entire run defense. It's him and Dean Lowry, but he's one of the best run stoppers in the league, top 25 in pressure rates. If he is out, that opens up a huge hole in the middle of the offensive line for the Packers. So it would make Lynch a better play. Lynch is my 7th option at running back on the 4-game slate, so I'm just not getting there. Homer is my 10th. But on that 2-game slate, Lynch is up there as like a 3rd or 4th option, and I actually do like him.
All right. I guess what we'll do real quick, because we do have about 7 minutes and 35 seconds until we do lock. For anyone in here, if you want to go ahead and ask questions, we can dish them over to Sal. Go ahead and answer them. And also for everyone in here, don't forget our wonderful sponsor, Fantasy Draft, the only rake-free daily fantasy sports website. Don't forget about them. Don't forget about the promo code AWESEMO, AWESEMO. Head over there. They have some great tournaments still for football for tomorrow as well. But other than that, guys, if you can also continue to like, subscribe, and don't forget to go ahead and get notified when all this beautiful content that everyone makes every single day here. Go ahead and get notified. But what kind of questions do we have before we go ahead and lock this down? I guess we have one right here. Who is a better play, Brown or Watkins?
So currently for me, a better play. It's a really big ownership gap there. I'll go with, if you're playing one lineup, I'll go with Watkins just because of what it allows you to open up.
Okay. And then Ace King, he asked, who is the lock for the Saturday only quarterback slate?
The lock for that Saturday slate, I think it's without a doubt Mahomes. And also the question before, I'm assuming now they're referring to Marquise Hollywood Brown. Yeah, I would go Watkins over Hollywood Brown.
Peter Porker asked, DraftKings tourney, what do you guys think of Gus Edwards?
So I think Gus Edwards would have been a fine play. I think he's somewhat in play on Showdown, but I can't get there. If Mark Ingram's actually expected to play in this one, even in a limited role, you're probably just getting Gus Edwards for around 10 touches. I'm probably not going to get there.
Yeah, I would say here's the play with Gus. 2-game slate, don't mind it, but I will say this. We have to be weary of this calf injury. If it does tweak, we could see an uptick for Gus Edwards. Could be a sneaky play. I mean, you are hoping for somewhat of an injury, but just keep in mind, don't mind it on a 2-game slate. I think it's very contrarian, and it's a dart throw on a GBP format. We have another one. Let's see here. These questions, some of them, obviously, we're not going to go ahead and answer them. Okay. Can I play Tajay Sharp?
I would say no. And the thing that's appealing is he was running the slot routes, and they only threw 15 times last week. So he ran like 9 routes. But Khalif Raymond being back, he'll be in play, I think, not for a showdown, but he'll be like on the field for like 6 or 8 routes or snaps at least. That really hurts Sharp. Even if they throw 20 or 25 times, Sharp's going to be seeing like 10, 15 routes. And then you add in that Marlon Humphreys is going to be on him, and that's just brutal for Sharp. I would expect like at most 1 catch for like 8 yards.
So Ace Kane kind of want to backtrack this question real quick. You said Mahomes, but he's focusing on Saturday only. So do you think Lamar Jackson is the top quarterback play for today only on this 2-game slate?
On the 2-game slate today, I'll have to go with Lamar there.
Okay.
It's like it's a pretty decent margin too.
Thoughts on Reeve Siegel? Thoughts on Tannehill for cash on Yahoo?
I don't know his price on Yahoo. I honestly don't.
I'll tell you it real quick, just so
if it's for the 4-game slate, I assume he's like the flat min there.
He's $27.
So yeah, I still can't get there. I can't get there in this spot.
Okay. Thoughts on Garoppolo, Mostert, Samuel, Sanders, Kittle stack running it back with Cooks and Diggs? My God, he's all on board with the 49ers train.
Yeah, he's going for the double OT game, the 50 points on each side. No, I do think Jimmy G's I don't have any Jimmy G right now, but again, I'm playing a different type of way today and being very concentrated on really 1 or 2 games. But I do think Jimmy G is definitely in play. Those safeties do concern me from Minnesota, but he has a lot of weapons to throw to, a lot of good stacking options between Debo, Kittle, and Sanders. Based on ownership, I prefer San Fran right now as Kittle, Sanders, and then Debo, but they're all guys that are of interest to me today.
Bigger upside, Malik Turner or Jerron Brown?
Jerron Brown. So Malik Turner will run behind Jerron Brown, but like upside there is they're both wide receiver 4 and 5s on a team. So I think you probably see like 20% snaps for Jerron Brown on a good day. Malik Turner, if he steps on the field, for like 5-6 snaps.
And then other than that, I mean, there's really not too much. Anything else that maybe we should point out? We got 3 minutes left till lock.
No, I don't think so. I think that there are a lot of like the main injuries, and we're not going to get the news. They're really tomorrow. Like Seattle's whole entire team is injured. That Kenny Clark news. And then really just seeing exactly how healthy Will Fuller is if we get any more status on that. But yeah, I don't think so. I think we pretty comprehensively went into it. I do think that this week screams out just double tight end based on those 2 guys being very cheap. Like if you take the tight end designations off of Kelsey and Kelsey, if you're worried about the ankle or foot injury, he practiced limited all week, and then the team came out and said he's not hurt at all. Like it was just precautionary. So he should be good to go. But if you put them as wide receivers this week and just put that tag on them, they would probably grade out as like the best wide receiver plays on the slate in the mid 6K range when you're considering like Kelsey or Kittle next to a banged up Adam Thielen. So I think it's a really good slate for the people that keep asking like double tight end. Yeah, I think it's very viable this week.
Someone asked, what are your thoughts on a lower owned Mark Ingram with the calf? How are you handling your Baltimore running back exposure?
Right now I have no Baltimore running backs. I'm playing so in terms of like different unique lineups right now, I'm not 150ing anything. I have single entry 3 max and 20 max. I have like 30 unique lineups right now, and I don't have any of those guys.
All right. Other than that, I mean, we're not seeing too much. Hurst or Doyle?
Doyle.
I'm assuming that it's
Boyle.
Yeah, Boyle.
Yeah, so I'll go Hurst, and I think that's like most relative for the showdown slate. Hurst is I think $600 cheaper than Boyle, but they run like the exact same routes.
All right. Other than that, guys, got guys saying here is Diggs all day. Kittle ownership right now currently on the Osmo.com, it is 36.7%. Right now we are about to wrap up. We got a minute left until lock. Did you do the 2-game slate, Sal?
Not for Saturday. For Sunday though, I did.
Okay.
I have like projections and everything for the 2-game slate for Saturday, but I'm also playing NBA today. So I figured if anything on the 2-game slate, I'll have it covered in the 4-game slate.
Yeah. I forgot NBA is coming up too. Man, I love Saturday football.
Man. I'm on live before lock with Eddie first time at 6 too. It should be fun.
Oh man, that's going to be a good time. Can you run Lamar naked or do you need to stack?
So I think both are completely fine. I usually will run Lamar naked, and at that price point, because of his rushing upside, and they're probably going to try and run, I think it still makes sense. But on these really short slates, like you can see it either way depending on how you want to view it. But I do think correlation is even more important on these short slates because there's just so less options and less ways to actually accumulate points. So if you're playing one lineup, I would actually want to have Lamar with somebody. I think Andrews is the most obvious option, but then that's where it starts to become difficult because you're automatically giving up one of those other tight ends in Kittle and Kelsey. So I think either way is completely fine, whatever you choose. But I, on these short slates, would try and correlate at least one player. But I would only go to one on that Baltimore team, not two.
All right, guys. And I think that's it, man. I think we're locked, right? 435, 135. I think we're pretty good to go. You guys, good luck today. Let's go ahead and take something down. Hopefully your teams win. Hopefully you guys have teams still in the playoffs. My team didn't make the playoffs, so it is what it is. But other than that, we just want to say thank you for joining us today. Thank you for supporting us and continuing to like this. Give us a thumbs up, subscribe. Sal, before we go ahead and let you go, man, where can we find you?
Yeah, you can find me on Twitter at Sal Vetri DFS. I'm pretty active over there. I also have a YouTube channel, Sal Vetri, if you just want any other fantasy content.
Yeah, guys. And for me, at Chris Randone, any social media platform. Don't forget, if you guys haven't signed up to Osmo.com yet, go over there and check it out, Osmo.com/NFL. See everything they have to offer. Check out all the videos so you know exactly what you're getting before you get involved. Get 50% off your first month if you use the promo code live before lock. So don't ever forget that. A lot of great things going on in NBA. A lot of great things coming up for the rest of the playoffs and NHL. It's great things, man. Great team. Once again, thank you guys all. Have a great weekend and take care.